storm was loud enough to bury most sounds in Riverton that night, but Caleb Henderson still heard the motorcycle before it reached his shop.
The engine is screaming for help.
He heard the engine screaming through the rain, fighting for one more mile through Riverton's empty industrial streets.
Come on, just one more mile.
A violent metallic knock cut through the wind.
Not now!
And turned Malik's last mile into a fight for control. The bike slid into the flooded lot outside Henderson Motor Works, dragged sideways by rain, failing metal, and fading control. The rider fell hard near the old garage door, soaked to the bone and clutching his shoulder beside the ruined Harley.
Sir, can you make it run long enough to get me home?
Before Caleb understood why Malik was riding through the storm, he learned Malik had promised his daughter he would be at her graduation by morning.
My daughter is waiting for me.
Malik had no money, no backup plan, and no time left to lose. All he had was a father's promise waiting at the end of the road. Caleb opened the ruined Harley with the careful hands of a man who had spent his life listening to machines. Caleb listened to the broken engine for only a few seconds and felt 18 years of buried pain rise inside him.
I know that sound.
The failure was not ordinary wear. It carried the same deliberate pattern Caleb had feared for 18 years.
I've seen this before.
The sound inside Malik's Harley had already destroyed Caleb's life once, long before this storm brought it back to his door.
What did this bike do to you?
Because that sound had already destroyed his life once. For several seconds, neither man spoke as rain tapped steadily against the garage roof.
Don't touch a thing.
For several seconds, neither man spoke. Malik stood near the workbench, staring at the old title papers, as if the ink might rearrange itself into something easier to understand. Caleb remained beside the exposed engine, one hand resting against the cold metal of the Road King. The storm had begun to move beyond Riverton by then, but rain still tapped steadily against the roof, slipping through a crack near the back wall and falling into an empty oil pan with a slow, hollow rhythm. Malik had spent most of his adult life around motorcycles. He knew enough to recognize when a mechanic was concerned and when a mechanic was simply trying to sound important. But what he saw on Caleb's face was neither. It was grief mixed with recognition, the look of a man who had just found a piece of his own past hidden inside a stranger's machine. He asked Caleb what the name on the paperwork meant. The old mechanic did not answer immediately. He picked up the damaged cam component again and turned it beneath the fluorescent light. Its edges were worn down, but the seal was still there. Small, faint, nearly invisible unless someone knew where to look. Then Caleb told Malik that the rider listed on those documents had died in the accident that ruined him. Not the man who bought the bike years later. Not the rider who had owned it before Malik. The original rider. The man whose crash had been used to blame Caleb for a failure he had tried to prevent. Malik looked back at the Road King. Suddenly, the motorcycle no longer seemed like an unlucky purchase from a liquidation yard. It looked like evidence that had somehow survived 18 years of lies. Caleb explained that the official report had claimed the motorcycle had been destroyed after the crash. That detail had always bothered him, though he had never been able to prove why. The bike had been taken away before he could inspect it. The police had refused to let him near the evidence. Victor's lawyers had moved quickly, and every question Caleb asked had been treated as the bitter complaint of a man trying to escape responsibility. By the time Caleb understood how completely he had been trapped, the machine was gone. Or so he had believed. Malik asked the question that had been hanging in the garage since the moment Caleb saw the title. If the bike was supposed to be destroyed, how had it ended up in his hands? Caleb had no answer, but he knew one thing with certainty. Machines did not disappear on their own. Someone had moved that Harley. Someone had rebuilt it. Someone had removed parts, replaced evidence, erased records, and then sent it back into the world under a different history. And if the same kind of damaged component had caused the previous owner's highway crash, then Victor Hale's secret had not ended 18 years earlier. It had continued. That realization changed the repair. Until then, Caleb had been trying to save Malik's ride so a father could keep a promise to his daughter. But now every part that came off the engine mattered for another reason. The damaged chain, the worn guide, the altered tensioner, the hidden Hale seal. None of it could be thrown away. Caleb laid each piece on a clean cloth, carefully separating them from the normal debris of the repair. He took photographs with an old digital camera from a drawer beneath the counter. The camera was outdated, its screen scratched, but it still worked. He photographed the seals, the manufacturing numbers, the strange cuts in the metal, and the repair marks that had been hidden under layers of grease. Malik watched quietly for a while. Then he asked whether this could get Caleb into trouble. The old mechanic gave a tired half-smile. Trouble, he said, had been living with him for 18 years. He just had not known its name. That was the first time Malik saw something change in Caleb. Before that night, the older man had carried himself like someone trying not to take up space in the world. He moved carefully. He spoke softly. He avoided eye contact too long. But now, while studying the engine, Caleb's hands became steadier. His back straightened. The old instinct returned to him, the instinct of a mechanic who trusted what he knew, even when nobody else believed him. He began explaining the failure in a way Malik could understand. The chain tensioner had not simply worn down. It had been weakened by design. The materials were cheap, but the failure pattern was too consistent to be accidental. The part had been made to look almost identical to a reliable one, yet it lacked the strength required for long-distance riding. It would survive just long enough to pass inspection. It would survive long enough for a customer to drive away feeling satisfied. Then, under heat and pressure, it would begin to fail. A rider might hear a faint metallic tapping first, then a vibration. Then, if they ignored it or could not reach help in time, the engine could lock. Caleb's voice became quieter as he described the last part. An engine lock at highway speed could turn a motorcycle into a weapon against the person riding it. Malik looked down at the wet leather gloves in his hands. He had been less than an hour from that kind of disaster when he reached Henderson Motor Works. For the first time, he understood that Caleb had not just repaired his bike. The old man may have saved his life. But Caleb did not want gratitude. He seemed almost uncomfortable when Malik tried to thank him. Instead, he returned to the engine and kept working. Every few minutes, he would pause, listen, adjust something, and continue. There was no rush in his movements, yet there was urgency in everything he did. The clock above the office door passed 2 in the morning, then 3. By 4, the rain had weakened into a mist, and the distant thunder had faded beyond the warehouses at the edge of town. The city outside had gone quiet. Only the occasional sound of tires on wet pavement passed through the darkness. Inside the garage, Caleb installed the camshaft he had kept hidden for so many years. He did not make a ceremony of it. He did not tell Malik how much it had cost him to use it. He simply cleaned the part one final time, fitted it into place, and tightened each bolt with the kind of attention that comes from experience and regret. But Malik understood. He had seen the way Caleb held that camshaft before putting it into the engine. It was not like a mechanic holding a spare part. It was like a father holding the last object connected to a life he had failed to protect. Malik offered to pay for it. Caleb refused. Malik offered to sell the Road King once he reached Fairmont, to send the money back, to do whatever it took. Again, Caleb refused. Then, after a long silence, the old man told him something that did not sound like an order. It sounded more like a request from someone who had spent too many years alone. He asked Malik to come back after the graduation. No matter what happened, no matter how tired he was, no matter whether the day went well or badly. Just come back. Malik nodded. He had no idea why that promise mattered so much, but he knew it did. And after hearing what Caleb had lost, he could not bring himself to take the request lightly. A little before dawn, the Road King came back to life. The engine did not roar wildly. It settled into a deep, steady rhythm, low and strong, like a heartbeat returning after a long illness. Caleb listened with his head slightly tilted, eyes closed, letting the sound fill the garage. For a moment, Malik thought the old mechanic might cry, but Caleb only opened his eyes and gave a single nod. The bike was ready. Malik stood beside it in the gray light of early morning, looking down at the man who had worked through a storm for someone he had never met. He wanted to say something meaningful, something big enough to match what had been done for him. But there are moments when words feel too small. So he simply told Caleb that he would not forget. Caleb looked toward the old framed photograph in the office. Then he looked back at Malik. He told him that forgetting was easy. Keeping a promise was harder. Malik rode out of Riverton as the first thin line of sunlight touched the clouds. The streets were still wet. The warehouses were still dark. But the Road King moved smoothly beneath him, carrying him toward Fairmont, toward his daughter, toward the promise he had nearly lost. Caleb remained at the garage door long after the sound of the motorcycle disappeared. Then he turned back inside. The broken parts were still laid out on the cloth. The old title papers were still open on the workbench. The Hale seal sat beneath the yellow light like a small wound that had finally started bleeding again. Caleb picked up the burned spark plug he had kept from Isaiah's accident. For 18 years, he had treated it like proof of his failure. He had hidden it in a drawer, taken it out only when grief became too heavy, then put it away again before morning. But that day, he did not return it to the drawer. He placed it beside the damaged component from Malik's motorcycle. Old evidence beside new evidence. A dead son beside a living truth. By 8 o'clock, Riverton was awake. And by 9, Victor Hale was standing outside Henderson Motor Works with 2 investors, a polished black SUV, and the kind of smile that had fooled people for most of his life. Victor had aged well on the surface. His hair was silver now, but styled carefully. His jacket looked expensive. His watch caught the morning light. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the world had already decided he was important. Behind him, across the street, banners were being hung on a vacant lot. The banners displayed the logo of Hale Performance Customs and announced the opening of a new luxury performance center. It was bigger than Victor's original garage had ever been. Glass walls, chrome signage, a showroom for wealthy riders who wanted their machines to look dangerous without ever having to understand what was inside them. Caleb watched from the doorway as Victor approached. The investors stayed a few steps behind, pretending to admire the old shop while clearly seeing it as nothing more than a piece of land in the way. Victor greeted Caleb with the practiced warmth of a man who enjoyed being cruel only when no one could prove it. He spoke about progress, about opportunity, about how Riverton was changing. Then he handed Caleb a folder containing the final notice from the bank. 7 days. That was all Caleb had left before the property would be transferred. Victor acted as though he was doing him a favor by delivering the news personally. He suggested that perhaps it was time for Caleb to stop fighting old ghosts. He suggested that a man his age deserved peace. Caleb did not react. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked back to the workbench and picked up the damaged component from Malik's bike. Then he placed it on the counter between them. Victor's expression changed, only for a second. But Caleb saw it. The smile remained, yet something behind it slipped. His eyes moved to the Hale seal stamped into the metal. His fingers tightened around the folder. The smooth confidence in his face became strained, like a thin layer of paint cracking over rust. Victor recovered quickly. He said the seal meant nothing. He claimed parts changed hands all the time. He suggested Caleb was seeing conspiracies because he could not accept the past. But when Victor turned to leave, Caleb noticed something else. His hand was trembling. Not much, just enough. And for the first time in 18 years, Caleb Henderson understood that Victor Hale was afraid. Victor Hale left Henderson Motor Works with the same polished smile he had arrived with, but Caleb knew that smile had changed. It no longer belonged to a man who felt untouchable. It belonged to a man who had just seen a ghost rise from the floorboards of his own past. For the rest of that day, Caleb did not open the shop to customers. He locked the front door, pulled down the faded blinds, and spread every piece of evidence across the workbench. Malik's damaged parts sat beside the burned spark plug from Isaiah's accident. The title papers remained open near Caleb's camera. The old evidence seemed almost impossible to connect at first. One motorcycle from 18 years ago, one bike that should have been destroyed, one seal hidden inside a part no ordinary rider would ever inspect. But Caleb had spent his life listening to engines. He knew that machines told the truth slowly. They did not care who owned the building, who signed the checks, or who had the better lawyer. Metal remembered pressure. Bearings remembered heat. Chains remembered strain. And when something failed by design, the evidence often stayed buried inside the damage. By noon, Caleb had photographed every detail twice. He wrote down serial numbers. He matched worn patterns. He checked the old manuals he had kept in a cabinet near the back wall. Then he found something he had not expected. the part inside Malik's road. King carried a batch number that had been discontinued years earlier. It was from the same supplier Victor had used before the old accident. The same supplier Caleb had warned him about. The same supplier Victor had once claimed had never existed. For nearly 2 hours, Caleb sat alone in the office, staring at that number. He could still hear Isaiah's voice in his mind, not the voice from the night he died. Caleb had tried for years not to remember that night. What stayed with him was an earlier memory. Isaiah standing beside him at the old shop, grease on his hands, laughing at the way his father could recognize a bad engine by sound alone. Isaiah had once told him that engines were honest because they could not lie about pain. If something was wrong inside them, they would always make a noise eventually. Caleb had not understood then how much those words would haunt him. Now they felt like a warning. By late afternoon, Malik called. He had made it to Fairmont. For a moment, Caleb did not answer. He stared at the phone, still unsure whether the call would bring relief or more trouble. Then he picked up. Malik's voice was tired, but it carried something Caleb had not heard in years. Joy. He had arrived just before the ceremony began. He had walked into the school auditorium with rain still drying on his jacket and road dust on his boots. His daughter had been seated among the graduates, wearing the dress he had carried through the storm. When she saw him, she did not run to him. She did not make a scene. She simply looked over the crowd, found him standing near the back wall, and smiled in a way that made every mile worth it. Malik told Caleb that he had never felt so ashamed of how close he came to breaking that promise. Then he told him that his daughter had hugged him afterward and said she knew he would come. That was all Caleb needed to hear. For the first time in 18 years, he felt that maybe one promise had been saved from the same fate as all the others. But Malik had not forgotten what happened at the shop. He had spent part of the afternoon searching through the paperwork for his Road King. The more he looked, the stranger it became. The title history had gaps. The previous owner had purchased the bike through a dealer that no longer existed. The dealer's address turned out to belong to a storage company connected to Hale Performance Customs, and the insurance report from the old owner's death mentioned a mechanical failure but did not list the exact cause. That detail bothered Malik. He called one of the men from Road Saints MC, an older biker named Curtis Bell. Curtis had spent more than 20 years as a state traffic investigator before retirement. He knew how evidence disappeared when powerful people wanted it gone. He also knew how often old files were marked closed long before the truth was fully understood. Malik told him everything. At first, Curtis was cautious. He had seen too many people mistake grief for proof. But when Malik mentioned the Hale seal and the batch number, Curtis became quiet. Then he told Malik that he had heard rumors years ago about Hale Performance Customs. Rumors of cheap parts, suspicious accidents, customers pressured into silence, and repair records that never quite matched the machines on the road. Nothing had ever been proven. Not because there was no truth, because no one had managed to hold enough of it at once. Malik told Curtis he had found a man who might have been carrying part of that truth for 18 years. 3 days later, Malik returned to Riverton. He did not come alone. By then, Caleb had almost convinced himself that Malik would not return. He had spent the days preparing for the bank's deadline, sorting tools into boxes, deciding which machines he could sell, which photographs he could not bear to throw away, and which memories he would have to leave behind if Henderson Motor Works closed forever. He had also started to notice cars slowing near the shop. A black sedan passed twice one afternoon. A dark pickup sat across the street for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. No threats, no broken windows, no warning left on the door. But Caleb understood the message. Victor was watching. On the fourth morning after the storm, the sound of motorcycles rolled down the street. Not one bike, several. The sound was deep and steady, echoing through Riverton's old warehouse district. Caleb stepped outside and saw Malik leading a line of riders into the parking lot. Behind him were members of Road Saints MC, all of them dressed in worn leather and rain-faded denim. They did not arrive like men looking for trouble. They arrived like people who had already decided that someone had been left alone for too long. Curtis Bell was among them. He was tall, gray-haired, and walked with the stiff posture of a man whose old injuries had never fully healed. Beside him stood another biker Caleb recognized after a long moment. The man's name was Raymond Knox, a retired Harley mechanic who had once worked at a supplier near Hale's original garage. Raymond looked older than Caleb remembered. His face had deep lines, and his hands shook slightly as he removed his gloves. But his eyes were clear. He told Caleb he had been at Hale Performance Customs on the night of the accident. Caleb did not speak. Raymond explained that he had delivered a crate of parts that evening. He had seen Victor argue with Caleb near the service bay. He had heard Caleb warn him that the cam system was dangerous. He had heard Victor say the bike was leaving that night, no matter what Caleb thought. Then, after the crash, Raymond saw Victor pull paperwork from an office drawer before the police arrived. He watched him hand documents to a lawyer. He watched him tell everyone that Caleb had approved the work. Raymond had wanted to say something then, but Victor had threatened him. Not openly. Not in a way that could be reported. Victor had simply made it clear that Raymond's job, his reputation, and his family's security could disappear if he caused trouble. Raymond had been younger then. His wife was sick. His son had just started college. He convinced himself that someone else would speak up. No one did. For 18 years, he had carried that cowardice. When Malik told him about Caleb repairing the Road King through the storm, using his own last valuable part to help a stranger keep a promise to his daughter, Raymond said something inside him changed. He realized Caleb had spent 18 years paying for a sin that belonged to another man. And Raymond had spent 18 years helping that lie survive. Curtis placed a thick folder on Caleb's workbench. Inside were copies of old reports, insurance records, auction documents, and storage transfers. It took hours to piece together the full story, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. The motorcycle from the original accident had not been destroyed. It had been moved from the evidence yard under a false disposal order. A shell company had purchased it. The shell company was linked through a chain of ownership to Hale Performance Customs. The bike was rebuilt using replacement parts, then sold through another intermediary to avoid attention. Years later, it reappeared in the hands of the man whose name Malik had found on the title. That man died in a highway accident after his engine locked. The Road King was later sold again through an estate liquidation. And eventually, by chance or fate, it made its way to Malik. The machine had carried the same secret through several owners, leaving wreckage behind it like a trail no one had bothered to follow. Caleb sat down slowly. He had spent years believing the past was over because everyone else had moved on. But the truth was worse. Victor had not simply destroyed Caleb's life and walked away. He had taken the same dangerous system, the same dishonest parts, the same method of hiding evidence, and turned it into a business model. The old accident was not one tragedy. It was the first warning. Curtis told Caleb they needed independent engineers. They needed the damaged parts examined by people with no connection to Hale. They needed the old case reopened. They needed journalists willing to listen. And they needed to move before Victor had time to erase anything else. Caleb listened, but fear still lived inside him. He had been here before. He had brought concerns to people in authority. He had trusted that facts would matter. He had watched Victor walk away while his own name was dragged through the mud. Malik understood that fear, so he did not pressure Caleb. He simply told him that some men spend their whole lives waiting for the right moment to become brave, only to learn that bravery usually begins when someone else is already in danger. That sentence stayed with Caleb. The next morning, Victor Hale announced the grand opening of his newest performance center. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, directly across from Henderson Motor Works. The timing was not accidental. Victor wanted cameras, investors, local officials, and reporters to see his polished new showroom, while Caleb's fading garage stood behind it like a symbol of failure. He wanted Riverton to believe that the future belonged to him, and that men like Caleb were nothing more than rusted pieces of the past. The invitation described Hale Performance Customs as a company built on safety, craftsmanship, and loyalty. When Caleb read those words, he almost laughed. Instead, he folded the paper and placed it beside Isaiah's burned spark plug. By Saturday, the street outside Henderson Motor Works looked nothing like it had during the storm. The skies were clear. The sidewalks had been washed clean. White tents stood outside Victor's new building. Caterers moved between tables. Large banners carried the Hale logo. Investors in tailored jackets gathered near the entrance, speaking about growth, property values, and expansion. Victor stood near the stage in front of the showroom doors, smiling for photographs. For years, he had mastered the art of looking like a man who had earned everything. Across the street, Caleb's old sign hung crooked above the garage. Henderson Motor Works. The letters were faded. The roof still leaked. The windows still needed paint. But that morning, the shop was not empty. Inside, Curtis reviewed the evidence one final time. Raymond sat near the office door, pale but determined. Malik stood beside the Road King, now fully repaired. His daughter's graduation flower still tucked into a side compartment. Several members of Road Saints MC waited outside, engines quiet, helmets in hand. Caleb stood near the workbench. In front of him was a small metal box. Inside were the damaged Hale parts, the old spark plug, photographs, records, and copies of every document that could prove what Victor had done. His hands were trembling, not because he doubted the evidence, because he knew that once he stepped outside, there would be no going back. For 18 years, Victor Hale had controlled the story. He had told Riverton who Caleb was. He had told the police what happened. He had told the newspapers who was responsible. And Caleb had lived inside that lie because he had no power to break it. But now, standing in the quiet shop with Malik, Curtis, Raymond, and the Road Saints behind him, Caleb realized something he had forgotten. Truth did not need to be loud to be strong. It only needed enough people willing to stop looking away. At noon, Victor stepped onto the stage. He began with the same speech he had given at other openings. He spoke about American craftsmanship. He praised the spirit of the open road. He thanked the investors who believed in his vision. He spoke about trust, safety, and the brotherhood of riders. Then the sound of motorcycles filled the street. One by one, the Road Saints rode into view. More than 30 Harleys moved down the block in a slow line, their engines low and controlled. They did not rev aggressively. They did not block traffic recklessly. They did not shout. They simply arrived. The crowd turned. Victor's smile stiffened. Malik led the group on the blue-black Road King that Caleb had repaired in the storm. He parked directly across from the stage. Behind him, the other riders formed a straight row along the curb. Then Caleb stepped out of Henderson Motor Works. He wore the same faded work shirt he had worn for years. His hands were still stained with oil. His shoulders were slightly bent with age. But he did not look small. He carried the metal box under one arm. Curtis walked beside him holding the records. Raymond followed behind, moving slowly but refusing to stop. The local reporter who had come to cover Victor's opening recognized Caleb almost immediately. She remembered the old accident. She remembered the headlines from 18 years ago. She also remembered that Caleb had disappeared from public life after Isaiah died. When she asked what was happening, Curtis handed her a copy of the evidence summary. The mood changed quickly. Victor tried to interrupt. He told everyone that Caleb was confused. He suggested that the old mechanic was bitter and unstable. He said the Road Saints were trying to sabotage a legitimate business. But his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Too many people were watching. And this time, Caleb was not alone. Curtis explained the chain of evidence, the false disposal order, the shell company, the rebuilt motorcycle, the repeat failure pattern, the supplier records, the mismatched parts, the mechanics analysis, the old accident report that never mentioned the batch number. Raymond then spoke. His voice shook at first, but it grew steadier with every sentence. He told the crowd that Caleb had warned Victor. He confirmed that Victor had pushed the unsafe bike out of the shop. He described the paperwork being changed before investigators arrived. He admitted that he had stayed silent because he was afraid. He said he had been ashamed of that silence every day since. The crowd did not move. Victor looked toward the investors, hoping they would dismiss it all as drama. But they had stopped smiling. One of them was already on the phone. Another stared at the Hale banner above the showroom entrance as if it had become something ugly. Then Caleb opened the metal box. He removed the burned spark plug. For a moment, the entire street seemed to grow quieter. Caleb told them it came from the motorcycle involved in the crash 18 years earlier. He explained that he had kept it because he believed it represented his failure. But after studying Malik's Road King, he understood that the machine had been failing long before Isaiah died. He held up the damaged Hale component. Then he looked directly at Victor. Caleb did not scream. He did not curse. He did not beg anyone to believe him. He simply told Victor that he had taken his name, his work, and his son. But he had never understood the machines he sold. That was the moment Victor finally lost control. He accused Caleb of lying. He called Raymond a coward and Curtis a washed-up investigator. He claimed Malik had planted evidence. He insisted that the old accident had been closed for years and that no one could reopen it. But panic made him careless. The reporter asked why he knew the old case had been listed as destroyed if he had never seen the disposal order. Victor froze. It was only a brief pause, but it was enough. Curtis had already contacted the State Fraud Division. The reporter had already sent copies of the documents to her editor. Independent engineers had reviewed Caleb's photographs and confirmed that the part failures were consistent with deliberate use of substandard materials. Within an hour, law enforcement officers arrived. They did not arrest Victor immediately in front of everyone. First, they secured the damaged motorcycle parts. They collected the records. They questioned Raymond. They requested access to Hale Performance Customs files, supplier contracts, repair logs, and storage records. But Victor understood what was happening. The story he had buried for 18 years was no longer buried. By evening, the grand opening had been canceled. The investors withdrew. The showroom doors remained closed. And the Hale banners, once meant to celebrate Victor's success, hung over an empty parking lot like reminders of a lie too large to hide. The investigation lasted months. During that time, more writers came forward. A widow from another county brought records from her husband's crash. A former employee described being told to replace expensive parts with cheaper ones. A supplier admitted that Hale had purchased batches of components that failed safety standards, but cost almost half as much. The evidence grew. So did the truth. Victor Hale was eventually charged with fraud, evidence tampering, falsifying repair records, and reckless endangerment connected to multiple motorcycle failures. Civil lawsuits followed. His business collapsed. The same reputation he had built by stealing Caleb's work became the thing that destroyed him. And the most painful part for Victor was that he could not blame anyone else. Every false signature, every altered record, every unsafe part, every rider placed at risk. All of it led back to him. Meanwhile, Riverton began to see Caleb differently. At first, people came to Henderson Motor Works out of curiosity. They wanted to see the mechanic from the news. They wanted to ask questions about the old case. Some came with apologies they should have offered years earlier. Caleb accepted some. Others he could not. Forgiveness, he learned, was not the same as pretending nothing happened. What mattered most was that Isaiah's name was cleared. The revised investigation confirmed that Isaiah had not caused the tragedy. He had tried to save others when the fire broke out. The city recognized him for his courage. A small memorial was placed near the site of the old accident, not as a monument to loss, but as proof that he had been brave when others were afraid. Caleb attended the dedication quietly. He did not give a speech. He stood beneath Isaiah's name and placed the burned spark plug at the base of the memorial for a few seconds before taking it back. This time, he did not see it as evidence of failure. He saw it as the beginning of the truth. Road Saints, MC, started a fundraiser to help Caleb keep his shop. He resisted at first. He did not want charity. He had spent too long believing that accepting help meant admitting weakness. But Malik reminded him that loyalty was not charity. Loyalty meant showing up when someone had spent years showing up for others. The money was enough to pay the bank, repair the roof, replace the failing electrical system, and repaint the front of Henderson Motor Works. Caleb refused to turn the place into something fancy. He did not want glass walls or polished chrome floors. He wanted the shop to remain what it had always been, a place where honest work mattered more than appearances. A few weeks later, a new sign went up above the garage. Henderson Motor Works, built with truth, kept alive by loyalty. Malik came by every weekend after that. Sometimes he needed a repair. Sometimes he did not. Sometimes he simply sat on an old stool near the workbench while Caleb worked and talked about his daughter's new plans after graduation. She visited once too. She brought Caleb a framed photograph from the ceremony. In it, Malik stood in the back of the auditorium, soaked jacket, tired eyes, and a smile so wide it looked almost painful. She told Caleb that her father had made a promise and kept it. Caleb looked at the picture for a long time. Then he told her that promises were not always about being perfect. Sometimes they were about refusing to stop trying, even when the road was dark, the weather was cruel, and every reason to turn back was waiting behind you. Years earlier, Caleb had lost his son because he believed work had to come before everything else. That night in the storm, he chose differently. He chose to save a stranger's promise. And in doing so, he found the truth that finally brought his own son home. Because sometimes, the person who arrives at your door needing help is not there by accident. Sometimes they carry the missing piece of a story you thought was over. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the force that pulls years of darkness into the light. And sometimes, justice does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the sound of an old engine finally running the way it was always meant to run. If you believe that truth may take time, but it never stops searching for a way back, share this story with someone who needs to hear it.
I kept this house standing for 20 years because I believe my boys mind their way back.
She had nothing left to fight with.
There is nothing left to sell, no one left to call, and no way left to fight them.
Then 3 black cars stopped outside her gate.
She spent 20 years losing everything because of our family's lies. No one takes her home today.
3 men walked toward the house.
Our grandfather took us away from her when we were children, then made us believe she had forgotten us. We came back because she deserves the truth. This was in my hand when I was 8 years old. She carried me through floodwater because I could not breathe, and she never let go of me.
Celeste recognized it before she recognized him.
I know that flashlight, but that little boy was only 8 years old. Who are you?
They were not sent by the bank.
The bank did not send us. I am Owen, and we found every letter you wrote after they took us away from you.
They brought 73 hidden letters.
There were 73 letters hidden in our grandfather's private study. Birthday cards, Christmas you sent us was kept from us.
Every letter proved she never stopped loving them.
I wrote to all 3 of you, every birthmas, every time it stormed.
The brothers had believed she abandoned them.
We were children, and they told us you had moved on without us. For 20 years, I thought you had let us go because we were too difficult to love.
But their grandfather
He never left us.
had stolen the truth.
He lied to us because he thought money could replace the woman who made us feel safe for the first time. We found every letter you ever sent us hidden in our grandfather's private study. For 20 years, he made us believe you abandoned us, and he made you believe we forgot you.
To understand why those letters mattered so much, it was necessary to go back to the winter of 2004, when Celeste Morgan was 46 years old and had almost convinced herself that God had forgotten the prayer she had whispered for half her life. Celeste lived in a small, weathered house near the edge of Pine Hollow, Tennessee, where the road narrowed into old trees and rusted mailboxes. The house had belonged to her Aunt Evelyn, a woman who believed that every home should keep a light burning near the front door in case someone needed help after dark. Evelyn had been gone for years, but Celeste kept the habit. No matter how tired she was, no matter how high the electric bill became, the porch light always came on at sunset. Celeste worked before sunrise in the laundry department at Pine Hollow Memorial Hospital. Most people never saw her there. They only saw clean sheets folded in perfect stacks, fresh towels delivered to rooms, and uniforms pressed before the next shift began. At night, she cleaned the county archive building, where old records slept beneath dust and locked glass cabinets. Her days were long, her income was small, and her hands were always dry from soap and bleach. Still, Celeste gave what she could. She brought extra food to the church pantry. She volunteered twice a month at a weekend program for children waiting to be placed in foster homes. She kept a box of winter coats in her hallway closet. Most of them donated. Some bought one at a time from thrift stores after payday. The children who came through the program knew her as the woman who remembered their favorite snacks, who never forced them to speak before they were ready, and who understood that a child could be loud, rude, withdrawn, or angry without being bad. Years earlier, Celeste had lost 2 pregnancies. The second loss had nearly taken her life. After that, doctors told her that another pregnancy would be too dangerous. She had spent months grieving a future that no longer seemed possible, then years learning to live with the empty space it left behind. But she never stopped wanting to be a mother. She simply stopped saying it out loud. One rainy evening in November, after 2 exhausting shifts and a bus ride home, Celeste unlocked her front door and found a message blinking on her answering machine. It was from Cassandra Reed, a social worker who had known Celeste through the weekend foster program. Cassandra had a problem that could not wait until morning. 3 brothers had lost both parents in a highway accident several weeks earlier. Their father, Daniel Vale, had been driving home with his wife after visiting family in another county when a delivery truck crossed the center line during a storm. Daniel and his wife died at the scene. Their son survived because they were asleep in the back seat. The oldest boy was 14-year-old Owen. The middle brother, Mateo, was 11. The youngest, Silas, was 8. In the weeks after the funeral, the boys had been moved from emergency placement to emergency placement. One family agreed to take Owen, but not the younger 2. Another said Mateo was too angry. A third said Silas's silence made them uncomfortable. The brothers had already begun to understand a terrible truth. People were willing to help them only if helping did not cost too much. The state was preparing to separate them. Cassandra knew Celeste's home was small. She knew Celeste did not have much money. She also knew Celeste had completed emergency caregiver training, passed the required background checks, and had been waiting for a placement that needed someone willing to care for children who had already learned not to trust promises. Celeste called Cassandra back before taking off her coat. By midnight, she had cleared the guest room, spread blankets across the old sofa, and pulled every extra pillow from the linen closet. She cooked a pot of chicken soup, though she had no idea whether any of the boys would eat it. Then she turned on the porch light and waited. The boys arrived after 1 in the morning. Owen entered first. He was tall for his age, thin in the way children become thin when stress replaces appetite, and he carried a backpack that looked too small to contain a life. Mateo followed with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Silas came last, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with folded paper stars. Celeste noticed immediately that none of them looked around the house with curiosity. They looked around it like prisoners measuring a cell. They had learned not to get comfortable. Celeste did not ask them to call her anything. She did not tell them everything would be fine. She did not ask them to smile for the social worker or say thank you for the soup. She simply told them there was food in the kitchen, clean blankets in the bedrooms, and enough room for all 3 of them to stay together. That first night, Owen slept in his clothes with his backpack under his arm. Mateo refused to eat until nearly 3 in the morning, when he thought nobody was watching. Silas sat by the window, folding and unfolding the same paper star until the corners tore. Celeste did not force him to stop. The first weeks were difficult in ways that no foster training manual could fully explain. Owen hid food under his bed: bread, crackers, fruit cups, even half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. At first, Celeste found it and almost scolded him. Then she remembered something she had heard from another foster parent years earlier. Children who have been moved too often do not hoard food because they are greedy. They hoard it because they do not believe breakfast is guaranteed. So Celeste placed a small basket in the pantry and told the boys it belonged to them. It was always stocked with crackers, fruit, cereal bars, and anything else she could afford. Nobody had to ask permission to take from it. Nobody had to hide it. Owen did not trust the basket at first. But after several weeks, the food under his bed began to disappear. Mateo struggled differently. He carried his grief like a match held too close to gasoline. A wrong look at school could set him off. A careless joke about his parents could make him swing before he had time to think. He had been suspended twice before Christmas, and once after, not because he enjoyed hurting people, but because anger was the only feeling he knew how to express without falling apart. Celeste did not excuse what he did, but she refused to define him by it. She introduced him to George Bell, a retired firefighter who ran a small woodworking program for boys at the community center. George had lost a son in the military years earlier and understood the language of grief that came out through broken things. At the workshop, Mateo learned to sand rough edges until they became smooth. He learned to measure twice before cutting once. He learned that strength could be useful without being dangerous. The first thing he made was a crooked wooden shelf for Celeste's kitchen. She hung it anyway. Silas remained quiet. For almost 2 months, he spoke only with his eyes, his hands, and the paper stars he folded from scraps of newspaper, old schoolwork sheets, and grocery lists. He lined them on the windowsill of his room, then moved them to the dining table, then placed one beside Celeste's coffee mug each morning. She never asked what they meant. She only kept them safe. Celeste had 4 rules in her home. The first was that whenever possible, everyone ate together. The second was that nobody would be punished for telling the truth. The third was that anger could be taken outside, written down, cried out, or worked through, but it could not be used to wound someone else. The fourth rule was the most important. The porch light stayed on until everyone was home. At first, the boys thought the rule was strange. Then they began to understand it. The porch light was not only for strangers, it was for Owen when he came home late from helping George fix a broken fence. It was for Mateo after detention. It was for Silas when he woke from nightmares and needed to stand on the porch steps, looking at something warm against the darkness. It was Celeste's way of telling them that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was still a place waiting for them. For a while, Pine Hollow watched from a distance. Some people were kind. The women at the church brought casseroles. George gave Mateo spare tools. A teacher at Silas's school quietly donated books with large pictures because she had noticed he liked to trace the drawings with his fingers. The woman at the grocery store began saving bruised apples for Celeste at a discount. But not everyone approved. Mabel Crew, who ran the weekly Pine Hollow Bulletin, had spent most of her life collecting other people's mistakes and turning them into public entertainment. She was the kind of woman who claimed she only cared about the community, while making sure every rumor reached the community before the truth did. Mabel began with questions that sounded harmless. She wondered aloud how a woman with 2 jobs could properly care for 3 boys. She asked why the county would place children in an old house with a leaking roof. She hinted that Celeste might be accepting foster payments for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The rumors spread because rumors always spread faster in places where people know each other's business, but rarely know each other's pain. Celeste heard them. She heard the whispers in grocery store aisles. She saw the looks when she walked into church with the boys. She noticed people growing quiet when she approached, but she did not fight every lie. She was too busy building a home. By spring, Owen had started helping her repair the back fence. He had a talent for fixing things without making a fuss about it. He could look at a loose hinge, a broken drawer, or a warped board, and somehow understand what it needed. Celeste began saving small amounts from every paycheck to buy materials. Owen gave up asking why she was spending money on a house that was barely standing and began helping her make it stronger. Mateo's grades improved, not because he suddenly became interested in school, but because George taught him how to take pride in learning something difficult. He started staying after class to work on math with a teacher who had once been afraid of him. He still had a temper, but now he knew anger did not have to decide who he became. Silas spoke for the first time on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Celeste had fallen asleep in the chair after cleaning the archive building overnight. The boys were in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches with more butter than necessary. Silas stood near the counter, watching smoke rise from a pan that had been left too long on the stove. Then he said one word. He said Celeste's name. Owen dropped the spatula. Mateo froze. Celeste woke so fast that she nearly knocked over her coffee. Silas looked embarrassed, as if he had broken something by speaking. But Celeste did not rush him. She simply smiled and told him she had heard him. That was enough. The real turning point came during the flood. In late January of 2006, Pine Hollow was hit by 3 days of relentless rain. The river rose. Roads vanished under brown water. Power lines fell across backyards. The town had seen storms before, but not like this. By the third night, the electricity in Celeste's house went out. The boys gathered in the living room under blankets, while rain hammered the roof. Water crept beneath the back door. The porch light flickered, dimmed, then went dark for the first time in years. Silas had always been afraid of storms after the accident that killed his parents. But that night, his fear became something worse. His breathing tightened. His chest began to rise and fall too fast. The inhaler he had been prescribed was nearly empty, and the nearest hospital was across several flooded roads. Celeste tried the phone. There was no signal. She tried her car. The engine turned once, then died. The volunteer fire station was less than a mile away, but between the house and the station was a stretch of road already covered in water. Mateo wanted to go. Owen wanted to carry Silas. Celeste knew none of them could manage it alone. So she wrapped Silas in blankets, gave Owen an old flashlight, and told Mateo to stay close behind them. Then she stepped out into the storm. The water was freezing. The wind cut through their clothes. At one point, Celeste slipped near a ditch hidden beneath the floodwater and nearly lost her footing. Owen grabbed her arm before she fell. Mateo held Silas tight against his chest, even though fear had made him shake from head to toe. They reached the fire station just before Silas's breathing became dangerously shallow. The volunteers got him to the hospital in a rescue truck. Doctors later said that the timing had mattered. Celeste spent the rest of the night sitting in a plastic chair beside Silas's hospital bed. Her shoes were still wet. Her hands were raw from cold. She had not slept in more than 20 hours. When Silas woke, he looked at her for a long time. Then he gave her a name that did not appear on any government document. He called her Mama Celeste. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly enough for Owen and Mateo to hear. Neither of the older boys said anything. They did not need to. From that day forward, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer a temporary placement. It was home. Owen carved a small wooden sign and hung it near the porch. It read, "The Morgan Home." Mateo built a narrow bench beneath the front window. Silas placed paper stars along the ledge, one for every night the porch light had stayed on. For the first time since their parents died, the boys began planning for the future. Owen talked about becoming a contractor. Mateo wanted to build furniture. Silas had started making little drawings of houses with yellow lights in the windows. Celeste began the paperwork to move from emergency placement to long-term guardianship. And then Alistair Vale arrived. He came in a black car with a driver, 2 attorneys, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside before he asked them to. Alistair was the father of Daniel Vale, the boy's late father. He was also the founder of Vale Holdings, a regional construction company that had grown into a national corporation. For years, Alistair and Daniel had been estranged. Daniel had walked away from the family business after Alistair refused to accept the life he wanted. He had married a woman Alistair considered beneath the expectations of the Vale name. He had moved away, worked ordinary jobs, raised his sons without asking his father for money, and kept the boys far from a world built on appearances. When Daniel and his wife died, Alistair had been notified through legal channels, but at the time, he had chosen not to act. The boys were grieving, the situation was complicated, and Alistair did not want public attention around a family conflict he had spent years pretending did not exist. Then an insurance settlement connected to the accident began moving through probate court. The existence of 3 minor heirs became impossible for him to ignore. Suddenly, Alistair discovered the importance of family. He told the court that he could offer the boys stability, education, medical care, private tutors, and a financial future Celeste could never provide. His attorneys pointed to the house's old wiring, the repairs Celeste could not yet afford, and the fact that her emergency caregiver status had not been converted into permanent guardianship. They did not accuse Celeste of cruelty. They did something more devastating. They made love sound insufficient. Cassandra testified that the boys were attached to Celeste and that separating them from her could cause lasting harm. George spoke about Mateo's progress. Teachers described Owen's new confidence and Silas's return to speech. But under state rules, biological kinship carried weight, and Alistair's attorneys knew how to turn every weakness in Celeste's life into evidence that she could not compete. The judge did not say Celeste had failed. The judge said the boys would be placed with their grandfather for their future. To Celeste, the difference meant nothing. The day they left was colder than the night of the flood. Owen stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the sign he had made. Mateo kept wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, angry at himself for crying. Silas held the battered flashlight from the flood night against his chest. Celeste packed what the boys were allowed to bring. Most of it was not much: clothes, school books, a few photographs, Mateo's first woodworking project, some paper stars. Before leaving, Owen slipped a folded piece of paper into the kitchen drawer. Celeste did not find it until later that night. It was a map of the house, drawn in pencil. The front porch was marked with a small yellow circle. Underneath it, Owen had written that they would remember where the light was. For a while, Celeste believed that promise would be enough. It was not. Alistair moved the boys into his estate outside Nashville. He told everyone that he was giving them a better life. But better, in his world, meant controlled. Owen was sent to a private academy that taught him how to speak in rooms full of powerful men. Mateo was placed in a strict boarding school after several angry outbursts. Silas was enrolled in a program designed to make him more polished, more composed, and less emotional. They were not physically abandoned, but they were emotionally managed. Whenever the boys asked about Celeste, Alistair gave them versions of the same story. He suggested that she had moved on. He implied that she had accepted the money the state had provided and chosen not to remain involved. He told them letters had not come because there was nothing to receive. At the same time, Celeste wrote. She wrote on birthdays. She wrote at Christmas. She wrote whenever she heard that a storm had passed through Nashville and wondered whether Silas still feared thunder. She wrote to Owen about home repairs. She wrote to Mateo about the old workshop tools George had left for him. She wrote to all 3 boys about the porch light. The letters never arrived. Mabel Crew made things worse in Pine Hollow. After the court ruling, she wrote a carefully worded article suggesting Celeste had lost the boys because the county had concerns about her care. She never directly accused Celeste of abuse, She did not need to. She used phrases like troubling circumstances and questions about stability. In a small town, vague words could destroy a reputation more effectively than a direct lie. Celeste lost her evening cleaning job at the archive after a board member complained that the county should avoid controversy. Some parents stopped letting their children attend the weekend foster program if Celeste was there. The church pantry, where she had volunteered for years, quietly asked her to take a break. The woman who had opened her home to 3 grieving boys became someone people crossed the street to avoid. Still, every night, she turned on the porch light. Years passed. The roof was repaired one patch at a time. The garden behind the house grew wild, then was cut back, then grew again. The boys became men. Owen learned the business Alistair wanted him to learn, but he never became blind to what power could do. Matteo became a skilled furniture maker and later founded a company that hired young people leaving foster care. Silas, who had once folded paper stars in silence, became a documentary editor. He built stories from old footage, forgotten letters, and details other people missed. They stayed close to one another because they had learned early that brothers were not simply relatives. They were witnesses. As adults, they began asking harder questions about their childhood. Owen remembered the basket of food in Celeste's pantry. Matteo remembered the shelf he had built. Silas remembered the warm circle of porch light reflected in floodwater. None of those memories matched the version of Celeste that Alistair had described. When Alistair died, the brothers inherited more money than they had ever wanted, and more answers than they were prepared to face. Among the documents in his private study was a locked cabinet. The key was found in a sealed envelope addressed to the estate executor. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, some still unopened. There were also notes from Alistair's staff, records showing that correspondence had been intercepted, calls from Celeste had been blocked, and school administrators had been instructed not to share the boys' contact information with her. For 20 years, Alistair had allowed his grandsons to believe the woman who saved them had stopped caring. For 20 years, he had allowed Celeste to believe the boys had forgotten her. The brothers began searching for her immediately. But Pine Hollow had changed. Records were incomplete. Celeste had withdrawn from almost every public part of her life. Her house was still listed under an old family trust in Evelyn Morgan's name. Mabel's old articles falsely suggested Celeste had left town years earlier. Every lead seemed to end in another dead file, another wrong address, another person who remembered her only through rumor. Then, nearly 4 years later, Silas found a hospital billing record connected to an old charity program. It led them back to Pine Hollow. It led them to a foreclosure notice. And it led them to a woman sitting alone in a dark house with one suitcase by the door, believing that the last thing she had left was about to be taken from her too. Celeste did not recognize them at first. 20 years can change a child's face so completely that memory has to search for smaller things. A way of standing. A habit of looking away when overwhelmed. A hand that turns a ring around a finger whenever anger is trying to rise. She saw Owen first in the oldest man's posture. He still carried his shoulders slightly forward, as if he were ready to shield someone smaller behind him. She saw Matteo in the way the middle brother glanced at the porch bench before looking anywhere else. And she saw Silas when the youngest man raised the battered silver flashlight and held it carefully, not as an object, but as proof that he had carried part of her with him all his life. For a moment, Celeste could not breathe. She had imagined this day so many times that reality felt almost cruel. In some versions, the boys had come back angry. In others, they had come back only long enough to explain why they had stayed away. In the saddest versions, they had never come back at all. Now they were standing in front of her, grown into men she had not been allowed to know. Owen stepped forward first. He did not begin with an excuse. He did not say that time had healed anything. He opened the briefcase and placed the letters on Celeste's kitchen table. Her hands shook when she saw her own handwriting. There were envelopes she remembered licking, closed in the middle of the night. There were stamps she had bought instead of medicine one winter, because she had believed a message from a mother mattered more than comfort. There were letters she had written after cancer treatment, when she could barely hold a pen steady. There were birthday cards for boys who had become men before she was allowed to see them again. She picked up one envelope and stared at it for so long that nobody spoke. Then she looked at Owen. The grief in his face told her everything. The boys had not forgotten. They had been kept from her. The reunion did not become easy, simply because the truth had been found. There were too many missing years, too many birthdays, too many first jobs, graduations, illnesses, heartbreaks, and ordinary afternoons that should have belonged to a family, but had been stolen by pride and silence. Celeste did not rush to fill that space with speeches. She made coffee. It was what she had done whenever someone came into her home carrying pain. They sat around the same kitchen table where Owen had once hidden crackers in his pockets, where Mateo had built his crooked shelf, where Silas had left paper stars beside her mug. The wood was more worn now. The chairs did not match. The room still smelled faintly of coffee, old paint, and the lemon cleaner Celeste had used for decades. Owen told her about the letters. Mateo told her about the years they had spent wondering whether she had chosen to let them go. Silas told her that he had kept the flashlight because it was the only thing from their old life that no one had managed to take from him. Celeste listened. She did not blame them. They had been children when they were taken away. Later, they had been young men trying to survive inside a family that treated obedience like gratitude. They had believed what they were told because children often believe the adults who control the doors around them. But the truth did not erase the damage. Celeste had spent 2 decades asking herself whether she had failed them. She had wondered if Owen had become ashamed of her. She had feared Mateo had turned his anger against the world because she wasn't there to help him carry it. She had imagined Silas losing his voice again, alone in some cold room far from the house where he had first begun to speak. For 20 years, she had lived with a wound that had no explanation. Now the explanation was sitting in front of her in a stack of unopened letters. Owen told her they had not come only to apologize. The bank had scheduled the house for auction because Celeste had fallen behind after years of medical bills, property taxes, and repairs. She had never complained publicly. She had sold what she could, delayed treatment when she should not have, and tried to keep the house because it was the last place in the world where she still felt connected to the boys. Owen had already paid the debt, not as a favor that would leave her feeling indebted, not as a grand gesture for cameras. He had arranged for the home to be protected through a legal trust that Celeste controlled herself. The house would remain hers. The land would remain hers. No company, bank, or relative would ever have the power to take it from her again. Mateo had brought plans to repair the roof, reinforce the foundation, rebuild the porch, and restore the garden. But he had made one thing clear from the beginning. Nothing would be changed without Celeste's approval. They were not there to turn her home into a museum of their guilt. They were there to give her back the security she should have had all along. Silas had something different. He had spent years making documentaries about people who had been overlooked by systems larger than themselves. He knew how to find the truth inside old records, erased histories, and stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He had spent months gathering proof of what happened in Pine Hollow. He found the court documents showing that Celeste had never been declared abusive or dangerous. He found the licensing records showing that her only obstacles had been financial and structural, not moral. He found letters from Cassandra Reed praising Celeste's care. He found statements from teachers, George Bell, hospital staff, and neighbors who remembered the boy's improvement after moving into Celeste's home. Most of all, he found Mabel Crew's old articles. The stories had been carefully written to avoid legal consequences, but their meaning had been obvious. Mabel had turned uncertainty into suspicion, and suspicion into public judgment. Her words had helped isolate Celeste at the moment she needed community most. Mabel was still in Pine Hollow. She had become older, slower, and more respected than she deserved to be. She sat on the community advisory board. She ran local heritage events. People called her a historian, though much of her work had been built on stories she never bothered to verify. Owen, Mateo, and Silas did not want revenge in the way most people imagined revenge. They did not want to humiliate Mabel for entertainment. They did not want to use their money to make her suffer. They wanted the town to face what it had done. And they wanted to create something that would prevent another family from being treated the same way. A week later, Pine Hollow held a public town meeting at the old municipal hall. The official purpose of the meeting was a redevelopment proposal. A private company had offered to buy several older properties near the edge of town, including homes once owned by low-income families. The plan promised new shops, parking spaces, and increased tax revenue. Many residents supported it because the town had struggled for years. Few people knew that Owen had purchased the development company's controlling interest months earlier. Few people knew that Mateo had spent years working with transitional housing programs for young adults, leaving foster care. Few people knew that Silas had prepared a short documentary built from old records, interviews, photographs, and the letters Alistair had hidden. The hall was full that night. Mabel sat near the front in a navy blue jacket, smiling at people who greeted her. She had no idea that the story she once helped bury was about to return. Celeste almost did not go. She had spent so many years avoiding public spaces that the thought of sitting in a crowded room made her chest tighten. She did not want pity. She did not want strangers looking at her with guilty eyes. She did not want her pain turned into a spectacle. But Silas told her, gently and without pressure, that the decision was hers. Celeste thought about the 3 boys who had once been too afraid to believe they would stay together. She thought about the younger version of herself, standing in a courtroom, while strangers discussed whether love was enough. She thought about every person who had heard a lie about her, and chosen silence, because silence was easier than asking for the truth. So she went. She wore a simple green dress she had owned for years. Owen walked beside her. Mateo carried a folder of documents. Silas held the old flashlight in one hand and a small box of paper stars in the other. The meeting began like every other meeting in Pine Hollow. The mayor spoke about investment. Council members discussed property values. Mabel made notes, as though she had already decided how the story would be told in the next edition of her bulletin. Then Owen stood. He introduced himself not as the head of Vale Holdings, but as a former foster child who had once been told that love could not compete with wealth. He explained that his company would not support the demolition plan. Instead, the Vale brothers were creating the Porch Light Foundation, a fund dedicated to keeping siblings together in foster care, supporting emergency caregivers, helping low-income families meet housing requirements, and giving young people leaving the foster system a safe place to begin again. The fund would provide grants for home repairs, medical support, legal advocacy, school supplies, counseling, and temporary housing. It would also create a local family resource center in Pine Hollow, not in a distant city where people had to drive hours to ask for help. Mateo explained that the old neighborhood would not be demolished. Several homes would be renovated and converted into short-term housing for foster families, grandparents raising grandchildren, and women rebuilding after medical or financial crises. The project would not be named after the Vale family. It would be named after the woman who taught them what home meant. Then Silas stepped forward. The room grew quiet as he placed the old flashlight on the table beside him. He explained that it had belonged to a boy who once believed nobody would come for him. He explained that the woman who carried that boy through floodwater had later been painted as unstable, selfish, and unfit by people who never bothered to learn the truth. The lights dimmed. A screen behind him came alive. For the next 12 minutes, Pine Hollow watched the story it had refused to see. They saw photographs of Celeste's house before the boys arrived. They saw a copy of her emergency caregiver certification. They saw records of Owen's improved school attendance, Mateo's workshop reports, and Silas's first documented words after months of silence. They saw court records showing that Celeste had never been accused of abuse or neglect. They saw excerpts from the letters she had written, each one filled with patience, worry, and love. They saw the false assumptions that had spread through town, repeated so often that many people had mistaken them for fact. And finally, they saw Mabel's own articles. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The silence in the room was heavier than anger. Mabel sat frozen in her chair. For years, she had believed that the harm she caused was small because she had never put her hands on anyone. She had not taken the boys away. She had not blocked the letters. She had not stood in the courtroom, but she had helped make Celeste alone. She had given people permission to look away. When the film ended, Mabel stood slowly. Her voice shook as she admitted that she had never verified the claims she printed. She had relied on gossip, on assumptions, and on the belief that a poor woman with no powerful family behind her would never have the ability to challenge her. She said that she had told herself she was protecting the community, but the truth was harder. She had enjoyed being the person who decided whose story mattered. Mabel apologized to Celeste in front of the entire town. Celeste did not rush to embrace her. She did not perform forgiveness for the comfort of people who wanted the evening to end neatly. Instead, she told Mabel that an apology was not the same as repair. Truth had to be spoken. Harm had to be acknowledged. Change had to be proven over time. The room listened. For the first time in decades, Celeste was not speaking from a place of shame. She was speaking from dignity. Mabel resigned from the Community Advisory Board the following month. She published a full correction in the Pine Hollow Bulletin, naming the false assumptions and admitting the damage they caused. She donated the profits from her local history books to the Porchlight Foundation. It did not erase the years Celeste lost, but it changed what would happen next. The town began to change in smaller ways too. The church pantry asked Celeste to return, not as a volunteer carrying boxes, but as an advisor for families in crisis. The archive building that once dismissed her offered her access to records for the foundation's work. Teachers who had remained silent when Mabel's rumors spread began supporting a school program for children in temporary housing. George Bell, now old and walking with a cane, came to the Morgan house one afternoon carrying Mateo's first wooden shelf. He had kept it safe after Celeste lost storage space during treatment. Mateo hung it back in the kitchen himself. Owen repaired the back fence. Mateo rebuilt the porch bench. Silas framed several of the paper stars and placed them along the hallway wall. The house changed, but it did not become unfamiliar. The cracked boards were replaced. The roof no longer leaked. The heating system worked. The garden came back to life. But Celeste insisted that the old porch light remain exactly where it had always been. It was cleaned, repaired, and fitted with a new bulb. But it was still the same light. The first Thanksgiving after the brothers returned, the kitchen was too crowded. Mateo burned the rolls because he was trying to cook and argue with Owen at the same time. Owen complained about the table being too small, even though he had built an extension for it himself. Silas sat quietly for a while, watching them with the soft expression of someone who had waited too long to see a room full of people feel safe. Celeste looked around the table and understood something she had not been able to understand before. She had not failed. She had never failed them. What had happened was not proof that love had been too weak. It was proof that power could be cruel when it valued ownership over care. But even after 20 years of silence, the boys had remembered the truth of what she gave them. Not every detail, not every day, but the feeling. They remembered being wanted. They remembered being safe. They remembered the light. Months later, on another rainy evening, Celeste was sitting on the porch when Cassandra Reed's daughter came up the walkway. Cassandra herself had retired years earlier, but her daughter had followed her into social work. She was not there to ask Celeste to take in another child. Celeste was older now. She had earned the right to rest. Nobody expected her to begin again from nothing. But the young social worker had brought a 12-year-old girl named Ava, who had been moved 3 times in 6 months and was waiting for a temporary place to stay while a kinship arrangement was being reviewed. Ava stood under the porch roof with a duffel bag pressed tightly against her side. She looked at the house the way Owen, Mateo, and Silas had once looked at it. Not with hope. Not yet. With caution. Celeste did not make promises she could not keep. She simply invited Ava inside for a meal. Owen set another chair at the table. Mateo pulled a dry blanket from the closet. Silas showed Ava the paper stars in the hallway and explained, without using too many words, that they had been made by someone who once did not know how to speak. Outside, rain tapped against the porch roof. Inside, the house grew warm. And before the night was over, Celeste walked to the front door and turned on the light. Because family is not only blood. It is not money, property, a last name, or a promise written into a legal document. Family is the person who keeps a place for you when the world has convinced you that you do not belong anywhere. Family is the hand that reaches for you in floodwater. Family is the home that waits without asking whether you deserve to return. And sometimes, after years of darkness, all it takes to find your way back is one porch light that never went out. Flight 718 entered the storm.
Captain's down! I need help!
Lightning tore across the cabin.
Everyone stay seated.
Then the captain collapsed.
Captain, stay with me.
All 186 lives held still.
Can anyone here fly this aircraft?
From seat 34B, Maya stood.
I can help.
She had no uniform or badge, only an old leather bag and a name the airline feared.
He said she could not fly.
She was fired for a reason.
3 years earlier, Maya wore captain stripes.
Sign the report, then walk away.
It started with one missing number.
The records don't match.
But to understand why Graham Voss was more afraid of Maya Reed than of the storm outside, we have to go back 3 years, to the morning she first noticed a single missing number in an aircraft maintenance record. At the time, Maya still wore the Aurora Skies uniform with pride. She had earned every stripe on it the difficult way. There had been no family money paying for flight hours, no powerful relatives opening doors, and no easy path from the neighborhood where she grew up to the left seat of a commercial aircraft. Her father, Daniel Reed, had spent most of his life working beneath airplanes rather than inside them. He was an avionics technician, one of those men passengers never saw, but depended on every time a plane rose above the clouds. Daniel had taught Maya that aircraft did not become dangerous all at once. A disaster rarely began with fire, smoke, or a screaming alarm. More often, it began with one small shortcut that nobody wanted to question. A number entered incorrectly. A warning cleared too quickly. A part marked as replaced when it had only been reset. A supervisor deciding that a delay would cost more than a risk. When Maya was a little girl, she used to sit beside him in the garage while he repaired radios, test panels, and old electrical equipment from the hangar. He would place a wiring diagram in front of her and explain that every line had a purpose. Even the smallest connection mattered because machines did not care whether people were tired, impatient, rich, or powerful. A system either worked properly or it did not. Those lessons stayed with Maya long after she became a pilot. She was never the loudest captain at Aurora Skies. She did not enjoy drawing attention to herself. She did not try to impress crews by acting fearless. What made her respected was the fact that she prepared more carefully than anyone expected. She studied weather patterns before every flight. She read maintenance notes instead of skipping past them. She listened to ground crews. She checked again when something did not make sense. That habit had saved passengers from minor trouble more than once. A faulty cargo warning, an incorrect fuel figure, a hydraulic message that turned out to be nothing serious. Most people in the company saw those delays as inconveniences. Maya saw them as proof that carefulness was not paranoia. Then came Flight 216 from Dallas to Phoenix. It was an ordinary overnight route. The passengers were tired. The cabin crew wanted an on-time departure. The weather was clear, and the aircraft had already been delayed once because of a late inbound connection. It should have been a simple flight, the kind people forgot the moment they landed. But while reviewing the maintenance log, Maya noticed that an electrical distribution unit had been marked as replaced during the previous week. The entry looked complete at first glance. The date was there. The technician's name was there. The maintenance release was signed. Only one thing was missing: the serial number of the replacement unit. For most people, it would have meant nothing. A missing number in a long page of technical records could easily be a clerical mistake. But Maya knew that components like that were tracked for a reason. A part's serial number told the company where it came from, how old it was, what service history it carried, and whether it had been connected to previous incidents. She asked the ground maintenance team to verify the record. The technician checked the paperwork, then checked again. He looked uncomfortable. He told Maya the part had been inspected and the aircraft was safe to fly. Maya did not accuse him of lying. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked to see the replacement documentation. It was not available. She asked for the maintenance supervisor. The supervisor arrived irritated, already aware that passengers were waiting at the gate. He explained that the component had been dealt with, that the issue was minor, and that the aircraft had completed several flights since then without any problems. Maya understood the pressure. Every minute on the ground cost the airline money. Every delay created complaints. Every cancellation turned into a report that climbed upward through management. But an aircraft was not safer because it had been lucky. She refused to sign the release until the records were verified. The flight was delayed. Passengers complained. Gate agents apologized. The company's operations center called repeatedly. By the time the documents finally arrived, the problem had been explained away as a simple database error. The part had supposedly been replaced correctly, and the missing number had supposedly been omitted during a system transfer. Maya allowed the flight to continue only after the aircraft passed a more detailed inspection. It landed safely in Phoenix. But Maya could not forget the feeling she had when she looked at that incomplete record. Over the next several months, she started noticing similar inconsistencies across Aurora Skies' older fleet. A repeated electrical warning that disappeared after a reset. A maintenance sign-off completed at a time when the technician had been assigned to another airport. Components marked as replaced without a matching inventory transfer. Aircraft that seemed to suffer the same minor problems again and again, but never long enough to trigger a formal grounding. At first, Maya believed the airline had a paperwork problem. Then she began to suspect that it had a safety problem. The more she looked, the more patterns appeared. The aircraft involved were not random. Many belonged to the same group of older planes that had been modified during a cost-cutting program. Several had used components supplied by a contractor called Horizon Avionics Solutions. The company had been praised publicly for helping Aurora Skies reduce maintenance expenses and improve turnaround time. But Daniel Reed had once warned Maya about companies that made their profits by promising that expensive problems could disappear cheaply. He had told her that the cheapest part was often the most expensive one in the long run. Maya compiled everything she found into a formal safety report. She was careful. She did not write with anger. She did not make accusations she could not prove. She listed the aircraft numbers, the dates, the recurring warnings, the incomplete records, and the supplier details. Then she requested an independent audit. For 2 weeks, no one responded. At first, she assumed the report had been lost in the system. Then she received an invitation to a private meeting with Aurora Skies management. That was where she met Graham Voss for the first time. Back then, Voss was not yet the chief executive officer. He was the airline's chief operations strategist, a title that sounded technical enough to be trusted and vague enough to hide the power behind it. He was known for saving money without appearing cruel. He had a talent for making difficult decisions sound reasonable. Investors liked him because profits rose wherever he went. Executives liked him because he never created public scandals. Employees feared him because people who crossed him often found themselves quietly removed from the path ahead. Maya entered the meeting room believing someone had finally taken her concerns seriously. Voss greeted her warmly. He praised her flight record. He spoke about her discipline, her professionalism, and the fact that Aurora Skies needed pilots who cared deeply about safety. Then the tone shifted. He suggested that Maya had become too emotionally invested in technical details outside her direct area of responsibility. He explained that maintenance teams had already reviewed the issue. He reminded her that pilots and engineers needed to trust one another. He implied that her persistence was creating tension inside the company. Nothing he said sounded openly threatening. That was what made it dangerous. By the end of the meeting, Maya realized that Voss was not trying to understand her report. He was trying to make her doubt it. He wanted her to believe that asking questions had made her difficult. He wanted her to believe that being careful had made her disruptive. He wanted her to feel ashamed for caring more about the truth than the company's image. Maya left the meeting unsettled, but she did not withdraw the report. Instead, she filed a second one. That was when Aurora Skies stopped treating her as an employee and began treating her as a problem. Within weeks, Maya was removed from active flight duty pending an internal review. No one explained what the review involved. No one gave her a clear timeline. She was asked to attend meetings where people spoke around the issue without ever addressing it directly. Her supervisors became distant. Colleagues who once trusted her stopped returning messages. Then the rumors began. Anonymous sources told aviation websites that a captain at Aurora Skies had repeatedly caused delays by overreacting to minor maintenance concerns. Industry forums began discussing an unnamed pilot who had supposedly clashed with ground crews. A columnist wrote about the danger of allowing personal anxiety to influence professional judgment. Maya's name was not mentioned at first. It did not need to be. Inside the airline, everyone knew who the story was about. Months later, when Aurora Skies finally released its decision, the company did not accuse Maya of misconduct. They did not claim she had broken any regulation. They did not say she was unqualified. They used softer words. They stated that her employment had ended because of concerns about professional collaboration and operational judgment. It was enough. Her licenses remained valid. Her training record remained strong. But no major airline wanted to hire a pilot whose former company had quietly labeled her a risk. Maya appealed. She requested access to the maintenance records that had prompted her report. She contacted regulators. She spoke to lawyers. But every path seemed to lead back to the same invisible wall. The airline insisted that its fleet was safe. The records she requested were delayed, restricted, or declared confidential. Her report was marked as unsubstantiated. The company moved on, and so did everyone else, except Maya. She did not stop believing that something was wrong. She simply ran out of people willing to listen. The hardest part was not losing the uniform. It was losing the future she had spent her entire life building. For years, she had imagined the first day she would become a captain. She had imagined the weight of the jacket on her shoulders, the sound of her name spoken over the cabin speakers, and the quiet pride on her father's face when he saw her standing beside an aircraft. Daniel Reed had lived long enough to see her earn that title, but he did not live long enough to see what Aurora Skies did to her. He had died a year before Maya filed the report, leaving behind a small metal case filled with old notes, component numbers, supplier records, and handwritten observations from his own years in aviation. At the time, Maya had thought of it only as a piece of him she could not bear to throw away. She carried that case everywhere, not because she believed it contained the answer to anything, but because it reminded her that someone had once taught her not to look away when the truth became inconvenient. After Aurora Skies pushed her out, Maya took whatever work she could find. She taught emergency procedures at a simulator center outside the city. She trained student pilots who dreamed of flying for airlines one day. She showed them how to handle engine failures, severe weather, rapid descents, and instrument malfunctions. At night, after the students went home, Maya sometimes stayed behind. She would sit alone in the simulator, surrounded by artificial screens and plastic controls, looking at a runway that was not real and listening to a wind that did not exist. She still knew every procedure. She still remembered every call-out. She still dreamed about flying. But she no longer believed the industry would ever allow her back into a real cockpit. That was why she had booked the cheapest seat she could find on Aurora Sky's Flight 718. She was traveling to an interview for a small training position in another state. The job did not offer prestige. It did not offer a captain's salary. It did not even guarantee that she would ever fly a real aircraft again. But it offered something she had almost stopped expecting: a reason to stay close to the sky. She had boarded the flight quietly, kept her head down, and chosen seat 34B near the back. She had no idea Graham Voss would be sitting in first class. She had no idea Captain Luis Herrera would collapse. She had no idea that the aircraft would enter a storm, carrying the exact kind of danger she had tried to expose. But when the cabin lights flickered and the first warning chime sounded, Maya felt something old awaken inside her. Not panic. Recognition. The sound was wrong. The pattern was wrong. And when Nora Bell asked if anyone on board knew how to fly, Maya had understood that remaining silent would be the same as helping the lie survive. So she stood. Now, as Nora guided her toward the cockpit, Maya could feel the eyes of the passengers following her. Some looked hopeful. Some looked afraid. A few looked at her with the same suspicion Graham Voss had planted in the cabin only moments earlier. But Maya did not look back. She had spent 3 years trying to prove that she belonged in the sky. This time, she did not need anyone's permission. The cockpit door opened. The air inside was cold and sharp. Rain hammered against the windshield. Captain Herrera lay unconscious in the left seat, while 2 passengers with medical training worked beside him. Evan Cole, the first officer, was gripping the controls with both hands, trying to manage the aircraft, the weather, the warning systems, and his own fear all at once. Maya stepped forward. Then she looked at the maintenance display. For 1 second, everything inside her went still. The aircraft registration number glowing on the screen was one she knew. It belonged to one of the exact planes listed in the report Aurora Skies had buried 3 years earlier. And suddenly, Maya understood that the storm was not the only thing trying to bring Flight 718 down. The moment the cockpit door closed behind Maya Reed, the storm stopped being something she could watch from a passenger window. It became a living force that pressed against every surface around her. Rain struck the windshield in violent sheets. Lightning turned the cockpit white for half a second at a time. Warning tones rose and disappeared beneath the growl of the engines, while the aircraft shuddered through air that no longer felt stable. Captain Luis Herrera sat motionless in the left seat, his eyes closed, his body held in place by the harness. He had collapsed only minutes earlier, leaving Evan Cole, the young first officer, alone with a medical emergency, severe weather, and a panel of instruments that seemed to be losing faith in themselves one screen at a time. Evan did not look like the kind of pilot who had ever imagined failure. He was trained, polished, and careful. He had spent years learning procedures, memorizing limitations, and proving that he belonged in the right seat of a commercial jet. But training had a way of becoming something very different. When the cockpit was dark, the captain was unconscious, and 186 lives were sitting behind a locked door. Maya understood that fear. She had known it long before Aurora Skies had taken her uniform, her cockpit, and the career she had once believed would define her life. Fear was not always loud. Sometimes it sat quietly in the room, hiding behind a steady voice and a professional posture, waiting for one small failure to become another. She did not begin by trying to take control of everything. That would have been useless. Evan was still flying the aircraft. The engines were still running. The airplane still had a path through the storm, even if that path was narrowing by the second. What Evan needed was not someone to make him feel smaller. He needed someone who could separate the emergency into pieces small enough to survive. Maya told him to stay with the essentials: airspeed, altitude, direction. Nothing else mattered until those things were secure. The rest of the cockpit could flash, chime, and threaten all it wanted. Panic would come from trying to solve every problem at once. Survival would come from handling the next problem first. For a few seconds, Evan's breathing slowed. His hands remained tight around the controls, but they stopped moving with the helpless urgency of someone searching for a miracle. Maya watched him settle into the rhythm of the work. He was still frightened. He was still young, but he was listening. Outside the cockpit, Nora Bell moved through the cabin with the kind of calm that could only come from someone who understood how much people needed to borrow courage from another person. She did not promise the passengers that everything would be fine. Promises were dangerous at 37,000 feet. Instead, she gave them instructions, routines, and the steady presence of someone who refused to let fear become contagious. Most of the passengers did not know exactly what had happened. They only knew that the captain had stopped speaking. The lights had flickered, and the storm outside looked less like weather and more like a wall. Some held hands with strangers. Some stared at the ceiling as if the aircraft might answer their questions. Some prayed in silence. And in first class, Graham Voss sat surrounded by comfort that suddenly meant nothing. Voss had spent his life believing that every crisis could be controlled by the right person in the right room. He knew how to make nervous investors feel confident. He knew how to turn bad press into reassuring language. He knew how to bury a problem beneath legal statements and polished smiles. But the cockpit of Flight 718 was not a boardroom. It did not care who owned the company, who had influence, or who could afford the best attorneys. The storm did not recognize titles. And for the first time in years, Graham Voss was trapped in a place where the woman he had tried to erase was more valuable than he was. Maya studied the flickering displays, while Evan followed the emergency procedures. A navigation screen went dark, returned, then began showing incomplete information. One electrical warning appeared and disappeared. Another followed. The failures were not dramatic enough to look like a total collapse, but they were too strange to ignore. They came in bursts, almost as if the aircraft were trying to tell them something and could not decide whether it had the strength to keep speaking. Then Maya saw the aircraft registration number on a small maintenance screen. For one moment, the storm disappeared from her mind. She knew that aircraft, not because she had flown it often, but because she had seen its records before. 3 years earlier, when she had still worn Aurora Sky's captain's stripes, she had found a missing number in a maintenance report tied to an electrical replacement. At the time, it had looked like a small inconsistency, a missing serial number, a skipped verification line, a document that seemed to have been cleaned too carefully. But Maya had learned from her father that the smallest missing detail could carry the largest warning. Daniel Reed had worked around aircraft systems for most of his life. He was not famous. He did not have a high-ranking office or a seat in executive meetings. He was simply the kind of technician who noticed what other people ignored. He noticed when parts were listed as new, but carried the wear of older units. He noticed when records were signed too quickly. He noticed when aircraft behaved differently after rain, after heavy electrical demand, or after long hours in difficult weather. He had never believed that danger announced itself loudly. Most danger, he used to say, began as something people found convenient to overlook. Maya had carried that lesson with her into every cockpit she had ever entered. And now, as she watched the displays flicker on Flight 718, she understood something that made her chest tighten. The storm had not created the problem. The storm had forced it into the open. She asked Nora to bring the worn leather bag from her seat in row 34B. Nora did not ask why. She had seen enough in Maya's face to understand that this was not a request made out of fear. It was a request made because Maya had found a thread, and she intended to follow it. While Nora made her way through the cabin, Evan reported the aircraft status to air traffic control. He declared the medical emergency. He reported the electrical failures. He requested priority handling. His voice was still strained, but it had changed. It no longer sounded like someone waiting to be rescued. It sounded like someone beginning to believe he might be able to help rescue others. Then Aurora Sky's operations called the cockpit. At first, the voice on the radio sounded controlled and professional. The operations representative asked about the captain's condition, the instrument failures, and the aircraft's ability to continue. But then came a question that did not belong in an emergency call. They asked whether Maya Reed was in the cockpit. For a moment, the storm seemed quieter. Evan looked toward Maya. Nora, who had returned with the leather bag, stood near the cockpit door and understood immediately that the company had not learned Maya's name by accident. Graham Voss had already made his calls. He had already started trying to shape the story before the aircraft had even touched the ground. Maya had once been afraid of what her name could do to her. She had watched it become a warning whispered in airline offices. She had watched former colleagues avoid her because defending her might make them inconvenient too. She had watched her career become a rumor that other people used to protect themselves. But the storm had stripped away every reason to be afraid. She told operations the truth. She was a former Aurora Skies captain with experience on that aircraft type. She was assisting the first officer during an active medical emergency. The aircraft needed priority. The crew needed a safe runway. Nothing else mattered. The operations representative suggested a diversion to a larger company-controlled airport farther away, where Aurora Skies could send its own staff and manage the emergency privately. It sounded reasonable to anyone who did not understand what the aircraft was telling them. But Maya understood. A farther airport meant more time inside the storm. More time meant more moisture, more electrical demand, more chances for the unstable system to fail again. And a company-controlled airport would give Graham Voss more time to gather people, shape records, and decide which version of the truth the world would hear first. Maya did not argue emotionally. She did not mention Voss. She did not make accusations over an open radio frequency. She simply explained the facts to Evan, and Evan made the decision that mattered. Graybridge Field was closer. Graybridge Field had a runway long enough for the aircraft if the approach remained stable. Graybridge Field had emergency crews ready, and Graybridge Field was the safest option they had. The controller confirmed the diversion. That was the moment Graham Voss began to lose control. Behind the cockpit door, he could still make phone calls. He could still speak to company lawyers and senior executives. He could still try to convince himself that the situation could be contained. But every minute, Flight 718 moved toward Graybridge Field. The possibility of containment became smaller. If the aircraft landed safely, investigators would examine it. If investigators examined it, they would find the electrical components. If they found the components, they would find the maintenance records. And if they found the records, they might discover why Maya Reed had been forced out 3 years earlier. Nora returned to the cabin after bringing Maya's bag forward. She moved from row to row with a steadiness that kept the passengers from seeing how serious the situation had become. A young mother held her daughter close. An elderly man kept his eyes shut and whispered words only he could hear. A boy with a small toy airplane no longer asked his mother whether they would be all right. He simply gripped the toy in both hands and stared at the darkness beyond the window. Near the front of the cabin, one passenger stood despite the seatbelt sign and demanded answers. He wanted to know why the captain was not speaking. He wanted to know why a woman with a controversial past had been allowed into the cockpit. He spoke loudly because fear often tries to disguise itself as anger. Nora did not give him the story he wanted. She told him that the crew was handling an emergency and that everyone on board needed to remain seated. When he continued to protest, the aircraft dropped hard through a pocket of turbulence. His balance disappeared before his argument did. He grabbed the top of a seat and realized in one sudden and humiliating instant that there were no important passengers on that airplane. There were only people who needed the crew to bring them home. He sat down. In the cockpit, Maya opened the old metal case from her bag. Inside were the notes her father had kept for years. Some were stained from workshops and rain. Some were folded at the corners. Some carried diagrams that only someone trained to recognize patterns would understand. Daniel Reed had never expected those pages to become evidence. He had written them because he believed that knowledge had a duty. If something dangerous was happening, someone had to leave a record of it. Maya found the page she was looking for. It described a family of electrical units that could behave unpredictably under extreme moisture and fluctuating demand. The failures could begin quietly. A display could reset. A warning could blink and disappear. A circuit could recover just long enough for someone to decide there was no real problem. But under pressure, the instability could spread. Maya looked from the notebook to the failing display. The patterns matched. It was not proof of every detail. Not yet. But it was enough to understand the immediate danger. The aircraft still had reliable primary data. The engines were stable. The flight controls were responding. But the electronic systems could no longer be trusted completely. And the longer they stayed inside the storm, the more dangerous that uncertainty became. She explained what she believed to Evan without overwhelming him. The goal was not to solve 3 years of corruption in the middle of a storm. The goal was to land the airplane before the next failure took away something they could not afford to lose. Evan listened. Then he did something Maya would remember long after the flight was over. He stopped trying to prove that he was in control. Instead, he accepted help. That was the difference between arrogance and courage. Arrogance demanded that a person face danger alone, so no one could see them afraid. Courage understood that survival sometimes required trusting the person beside you. The descent toward Graybridge Field began. The aircraft entered lower cloud, where the rain felt heavier and the turbulence sharper. Every few seconds, lightning exposed the wings before returning them to darkness. The runway lights appeared once through the weather, then vanished again. The cockpit was no longer full of alarms, but the silence between the warnings felt worse. Air traffic control reported worsening wind conditions. Rainwater had begun pooling along parts of the runway. Several aircraft had already diverted. Emergency vehicles were waiting near the landing area, their lights reflecting through the storm like distant signals from another world. Maya studied the approach information. The conditions were difficult, but not impossible. That distinction mattered. They did not have a normal landing ahead of them. They had an exhausted first officer, a captain who could not help, unreliable displays, a severe crosswind, and a system defect that seemed to be spreading through the aircraft in slow, deliberate waves. But they also had a runway. They had engines. They had enough instruments. And they had time if they did not waste it. Maya told Evan they would need to prepare for a manual approach. The automated systems had done enough to bring them close, but the final moments would depend on human judgment. Evan hesitated, not because he did not understand, but because he understood exactly how much was being asked of him. Maya did not tell him to be fearless. She reminded him that fear was not the enemy. Losing focus was. He had the aircraft beneath his hands. He had the runway ahead. He had the training he had spent years earning. And he had someone beside him who knew what it felt like to carry a room full of strangers through the worst moment of their lives. Evan nodded. The clouds thinned for a few seconds. Below them, Graybridge Field appeared. The runway lights glowed through the rain, narrow and distant, surrounded by darkness. For one brief moment, everyone in the cockpit could see where they needed to go. Then a powerful gust hit the aircraft from the side. The plane rolled sharply. A warning tone sounded. The remaining navigation display flickered again. Evan's breath caught. The runway vanished behind rain. And somewhere in the cabin, 186 people realized that the most dangerous part of the flight had only just begun. For a few seconds, there was no runway. There was only rain. There was only wind. There was only the violent sound of an aircraft being pushed sideways through the dark by forces no human being could control. Evan tightened his grip on the controls, but Maya could see the moment when fear tried to take over again. It was there in the way his eyes moved too quickly from one instrument to another. It was there in the breath he did not finish. It was there in the silence that came just before someone either found their training or lost it. Maya stayed with him. She did not take the airplane from his hands. She did not try to become the hero of the story by doing everything herself. Evan was the pilot flying, and the only way they would survive was if he remained connected to the aircraft instead of surrendering to panic. So Maya gave him one instruction at a time. She kept his attention on the remaining instruments. She helped him trust the physical feel of the aircraft when the screens could not be trusted. She reminded him that a crosswind did not need to be defeated. It needed to be understood. The plane would move. The storm would push. Their job was not to force the sky into obedience. Their job was to make the next correct decision before the next dangerous second arrived. Behind them, Nora kept the cabin from falling apart. The passengers could feel the descent. They could feel the aircraft being thrown from side to side. They heard the engines change as Evan adjusted power. They heard the storm strike the fuselage like heavy stones. Some people cried. Some people held the hands of strangers. Some stared at the seatbacks in front of them because looking out the window felt impossible. Nora moved through that fear with the quiet strength of someone who understood that people did not always need answers. Sometimes they needed a face that told them they had not been abandoned. She checked seatbelts. She helped a frightened child hold on to a parent's hand. She guided an elderly passenger through slow breaths. And when panic rose near the front of the cabin, she did not allow it to become a fire that spread through the rows. Even Graham Voss had gone quiet. The man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit could no longer pretend that he was protecting anyone. Every new movement of the aircraft reminded him that the woman he had tried to destroy was now helping save his life. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the truth was not dangerous because it embarrassed him. The truth was dangerous because it had consequences. The runway lights appeared again. This time, they did not vanish immediately. They were still distant, still blurred by rain, still narrow enough to make the approach feel unforgiving. But they were there. Evan saw them. Maya saw them. And in that moment, the cockpit changed. Not because the danger had passed, but because uncertainty had become a direction. The aircraft continued downward. Wind struck again, harder than before. The nose shifted. The wings dipped. The wet runway moved across the windshield, then disappeared at the edge of Maya's vision. Evan corrected too sharply at first, then steadied himself when Maya reminded him to make smaller movements. The storm wanted panic. It wanted a desperate reaction. But Maya had learned long ago that the most dangerous mistakes were usually born from trying to fix everything too fast. The plane crossed the threshold. For one endless second, it seemed as though the runway would remain just out of reach. Then the wheels touched down. The landing was hard. The aircraft hit the wet pavement with enough force to throw the cabin forward against its seatbelts. Water erupted from beneath the tires. Reverse thrust filled the night with a roar. The runway lights streaked past the windows as Evan held the aircraft straight through the wind. No one cheered immediately. The people in the cabin were too afraid to trust what they had felt. They waited. They waited for the engines to quiet. They waited for the violent shaking to stop. They waited for the aircraft to slow enough for their bodies to believe what their minds could not yet accept. Then Flight 718 came to a stop. For several seconds, there was only rain tapping against the fuselage and the broken sound of people trying to breathe again. Then someone began to cry. Someone else began to clap. The applause spread slowly. Not as celebration at first, but as release. People held one another. Parents pressed their faces into their children's hair. Strangers, who had never spoken before, reached across the aisle and touched each other's hands. They had gone into the storm as passengers, but they came through it as witnesses to the same impossible night. In the cockpit, Evan leaned back from the controls with the stunned expression of a man who had just discovered how close he had come to losing everything. He had not flown perfectly. No one could have in those conditions. But he had stayed present. He had listened. He had learned that courage was not a performance. It was a decision made over and over again when every part of you wanted to give up. Maya sat beside him, exhausted, but still. She did not raise her arms. She did not ask for recognition. She looked through the rain-streaked windshield toward the emergency lights waiting on the runway. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel something she had tried not to need. She felt seen, not by executives, not by reporters, not by the company that had taken everything from her. She felt seen by the truth itself. Captain Luis Herrera was taken from the cockpit after the aircraft had stopped and received urgent medical care. He survived. The medical crisis had been serious, but it was not the end of his story. Later, after he learned what had happened, he would understand that the people he had trusted behind him had carried his passengers through the one moment when he could not. But the night was not over. The moment the wheels touched the ground, Flight 718 stopped being only an emergency landing. It became evidence. Investigators entered the cockpit before the storm had fully moved away from Graybridge Field. They secured the flight data. They documented the electrical warnings. They examined the maintenance history. They took custody of the component information. And when Maya placed her father's metal case on the table in the airport interview room, the old notes that had once seemed like the private worry of an ignored technician became part of a much larger question. Why had the aircraft failed the way it had? Why did its maintenance records contain gaps? Why had Maya Reed been removed from Aurora Skies after raising similar concerns 3 years earlier? And why had Graham Voss seemed so terrified the moment he learned she was in the cockpit? Voss tried to regain control the way he always had. He made calls. He asked for lawyers. He attempted to frame the situation as an unfortunate combination of weather, a medical emergency, and an employee with a personal grievance against the airline. He wanted investigators to see Maya as a former captain who had returned to the cockpit carrying old resentment. But that story collapsed as soon as the evidence began to speak. The flight data recorder showed the sequence of electrical failures. The maintenance records revealed repeated component changes that did not match the parts supposedly installed. The missing number Maya had noticed years earlier turned out not to be a harmless clerical error. It had broken the chain of identification for a series of units that should never have returned to active aircraft service. Components had been listed as new when they had been rebuilt, relabeled, and moved through a supplier called Horizon Avionics Solutions. At first, Horizon appeared to be only another vendor in a complicated aviation supply chain. Then investigators followed the money. They found payments routed through companies that existed mostly on paper. They found contracts approved through layers of signatures designed to make responsibility difficult to trace. They found maintenance supervisors who had been pressured to sign forms they did not fully understand. They found workers who had been told that raising questions would cost them their jobs. And eventually, they found the financial links that connected Horizon Avionics Solutions to a network of shell companies controlled by people loyal to Graham Voss. The same man who had called Maya unstable had profited from the weakness she had tried to expose. The same man who had treated safety reports as obstacles had built a system that rewarded silence. The same man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit had known exactly why she could not be allowed to speak. Once the truth began moving, it moved faster than Voss could contain. Former mechanics came forward. Record specialists came forward. A retired quality control manager produced copies of internal emails that had been saved in private because he had never trusted the company to keep them. A supervisor admitted that some replacement units had been approved under pressure, even when the documentation was incomplete. Another employee revealed that Maya's report had not been dismissed because it lacked evidence. It had been dismissed because it had too much. And every new witness made the old story harder to believe. Maya was called to testify before an aviation oversight panel weeks later. She arrived wearing no captain's uniform. She did not need one. The uniform had never been the source of her authority. Her authority came from the fact that she had seen danger, spoken about it, and refused to become silent when silence was easier. She did not turn the hearing into revenge. She did not raise her voice. She explained what she had found 3 years earlier. She explained why the missing number mattered. She explained how maintenance records were supposed to protect passengers, not protect executives. She explained that safety was not a slogan painted on a corporate wall. It was a series of decisions made by ordinary people who either chose to tell the truth or chose to look away. Then she opened her father's metal case. Inside were the notes Daniel Reed had written before anyone believed they would matter. He had spent his life trying to make aircraft safer. He had never asked for a title. He had never asked to be remembered. He had only believed that someone had to leave a record when something did not feel right. For years, that record had been ignored. Now it sat before the people who had the power to act. Graham Voss watched from across the hearing room as the story he had spent years controlling came apart piece by piece. The reports he had buried returned as evidence. The maintenance signatures he had trusted became questions. The missing number he had believed no one would notice became the thread that pulled the entire deception apart. His downfall was not dramatic because he shouted or confessed in front of cameras. It was dramatic because he had built his power on the belief that no one would ever make him answer for what he had done. And now, one by one, people were asking. The board removed him from his position. Federal investigators opened criminal cases connected to fraud, falsified maintenance records, and the financial network behind Horizon Avionics Solutions. Months later, Graham Voss was taken into custody, while the same news cameras he had once tried to manage waited outside. There was a certain justice in the way it happened. Voss had spent years using paperwork to hide danger. In the end, paperwork exposed him. He had silenced people by making them feel small. In the end, the people he had ignored became the witnesses who brought him down. He had treated Maya Reed's name like a problem to be erased. In the end, her name became impossible to separate from the truth. Aurora Skies offered Maya an apology. It came with compensation, public statements, and an invitation to return. They offered her a senior position. They offered to restore the career they had helped destroy. They spoke about rebuilding trust and creating a safer culture. For many people, that offer would have seemed like victory. But Maya understood something they did not. Some doors were not meant to be reopened. She accepted the apology because acknowledgement mattered. She accepted the compensation because justice did not require her to pretend that harm had never been done. But she did not return to Aurora Skies. Instead, Maya used part of what she received to build something that did not depend on anyone powerful deciding who deserved to be heard. She created the Daniel Reed Aviation Fellowship. It began in a modest simulator training center near a small airport, where young people from neighborhoods that had never seen aviation as an option could learn about aircraft systems, emergency procedures, maintenance ethics, and the responsibility that came with stepping into a cockpit. Maya did not teach them that pilots were heroes. She taught them that pilots were human. She taught them that fear was normal, but silence could be dangerous. She taught them that a checklist was not just a list of tasks. It was a promise to everyone who trusted you with their life. She taught them that when something felt wrong, they had the right to ask questions. And perhaps most importantly, she taught them that no title, no paycheck, and no powerful person was worth more than the truth. Evan Cole visited the center months after Flight 718. The storm had changed him too. He had returned to flying after additional training, but he no longer confused confidence with control. He understood that asking for help had not made him weak. It had helped save 186 people. Nora Bell came too. She stood quietly near the simulator room and watched Maya guide a nervous student through an emergency procedure. Nora had seen Maya at her lowest point, standing in a cabin aisle while a powerful man tried to stop her from doing the right thing. Now she saw what had come from that moment. Not revenge, not bitterness, purpose. Captain Luis Herrera eventually recovered and wrote Maya a letter. He did not write it as an airline captain to a former captain. He wrote it as one human being to another. He thanked her for protecting the passengers he had been unable to protect himself. He thanked her for believing in Evan when Evan had begun to doubt himself. And he thanked her for proving that a person's worth could not be decided by the people who had once tried to take everything from them. Years later, passengers still remembered Flight 718. Some remembered the storm. Some remembered the hard landing. Some remembered the woman in the ordinary coat who stood up from seat 34B when everyone else was too frightened to move. But Maya remembered something else. She remembered her father's old notes. She remembered the missing number. She remembered the years when people told her that speaking up would only make things worse. And she remembered the truth that finally carried her through the storm. The sky had never judged her by her past. It had never cared whether she wore a captain's uniform, whether an executive approved of her, or whether a company tried to erase her name. The sky only asked one thing. When people trusted her with their lives, would she respect the truth? Maya Reed did. And because she did, 186 people came home. Because she did, a man who believed he was untouchable finally had to answer for what he had done. And because she did, a new generation of future pilots, mechanics, and engineers learned that courage was not always loud. Sometimes courage was a missing number in a maintenance record. Sometimes it was an old notebook nobody wanted to read. Sometimes it was a woman standing up in seat 34B, even when the most powerful man on the plane wanted her to sit back down. The truth may take time. It may be ignored. It may be buried beneath fear, money, and silence. But when the storm comes, the truth is often the only thing strong enough to guide people home. If this story reminds you that doing the right thing matters, even when no one stands beside you, hold on to that lesson. Because the world does not become safer when brave people stay quiet. It becomes safer when they speak.
That woman does not belong in this hearing.
Everyone watched the wrong woman. Leonard noticed the box.
How is that box here?
Naomi stayed perfectly still.
I did not come here for myself.
A red seal waited.
Please let the record speak.
And the moment Leonard saw that red seal, his practiced calm disappeared.
That seal was never supposed to surface.
Arthur sat trapped in silence.
I am still here.
His mind was still awake.
I understand what is happening.
Leonard controlled every word.
He cannot manage these decisions anymore.
He turned illness into weakness.
My uncle needs someone to protect him.
He called Naomi dangerous.
She is using his condition to get close to his money.
He still has the right to be heard.
She came to restore his voice.
The seal will be examined.
And its secret began 3 days earlier. The seal mattered because Arthur had tried to tell Naomi about it 3 days before the hearing, when everyone around him had already decided that his broken speech meant a broken mind. He was sitting in a rehabilitation room at St. Agnes Medical Center, his right hand resting weakly against a laminated communication board. The board contained simple pictures meant to help him choose water, food, pain medicine, rest, and family. Leonard had approved it because it made Arthur look helpless. It reduced a man who had built one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state to a row of small drawings that other people could interpret for him. But Arthur did not point to water. He did not point to home. He did not point to Leonard, even though Leonard had been standing nearby with the patient patience of a man performing concern for an audience. Arthur kept pressing one unremarkable image near the bottom of the board, a small brass lantern. The nurses assumed he wanted the bedside light adjusted. Leonard assumed he was confused. Naomi understood that Arthur was trying to reach a place that had been designed for exactly this moment. For nearly 40 years, Wren Meridian Industries had been known as Arthur Wren's company. It had begun with a single machine shop on the eastern edge of the city and grown into a national manufacturer of building systems, public transit equipment, and low-cost modular housing. Arthur had become wealthy, but the company's most important story was never its market value. Its story was the people who had stayed when business was difficult. Welders, machinists, warehouse workers, clerks, maintenance crews, and families who could trace 3 generations of steady work back to the same factory gates. Arthur liked to say that a company was not a monument to the person who founded it. It was a promise made to the people whose hands kept it standing. He had put that belief into practice in ways that irritated investors and inspired employees. Ren Meridian maintained a housing division that built durable apartments for working families. It funded scholarships for trade students. It kept a medical assistance program for retired employees long after accountants argued that the expense no longer made business sense. Those choices were not sentimental accidents. Arthur had seen what happened when executives treated workers as numbers in a report. His own father had lost a job during a factory consolidation when Arthur was young, and the memory had stayed with him. Success, he believed, meant little if it required people who had given their lives to a business to become disposable the moment they became inconvenient. Leonard Hale had never shared that belief. He was Arthur's sister's son, and from the beginning, he had learned how to make ambition look like devotion. Leonard had joined the company 15 years earlier, after an impressive career in consulting. He understood market language, shareholder pressure, acquisition strategy, and the polished way successful people could turn a selfish proposal into a speech about the future. He could make a layoff sound like a rescue plan. He could make the sale of a neighborhood look like innovation. He could sit beside a worried employee, lower his voice, touch their shoulder, and leave them feeling that they had been heard, even while he prepared to do the opposite of what they needed. Arthur had noticed Leonard's talent long before he recognized the danger beneath it. He made his nephew chief operating officer because the company was changing and because he believed younger leadership needed room to grow. Leonard rewarded that trust by becoming indispensable. He learned every division, befriended board members, cultivated bankers, and placed loyal executives in positions where they could control the flow of information. By the time Arthur began asking difficult questions about certain transactions, Leonard had already built a circle around himself. The conflict between them had started quietly. Leonard wanted to sell Ren Meridian's housing division to a private investment group called Horizon Vale Partners. The sale would be described as a strategic restructuring. Investors would receive a large immediate return. Ren Meridian would become leaner, more profitable, and easier to reposition for a future public offering. Leonard spoke about the proposal as though it were the only rational answer to a changing economy. Arthur saw something else. He saw rents rising, workers being pushed farther from their jobs, and an entire mission being handed to people who had never cared about it. He knew Horizon Vale had a record of buying affordable properties, cutting maintenance, raising fees, and selling them again when the numbers improved. He also knew that once the division was gone, it would never return. For 2 years, Arthur refused to approve the sale. He delayed meetings, requested independent reviews, and kept his voting shares locked behind a trust structure that made a quick takeover difficult. Leonard smiled through every disagreement. In public, he praised his uncle's wisdom. In private, he began preparing for the day Arthur could no longer stand in his way. That day appeared to arrive on a cold Sunday morning in early March, when Arthur suffered a stroke. The stroke did not take his memory. It did not erase his judgment. It damaged the part of his brain that helped turn thoughts into spoken language. The doctors explained that he had aphasia, a condition that could make it painfully difficult to find words, form sentences, read quickly, or answer questions under pressure. to anyone willing to slow down, use written choices, allow time, and listen beyond speech. Arthur remained unmistakably himself. He recognized people. He understood documents. He reacted strongly to business news. He could point to figures, write fragments, and signal agreement or refusal with remarkable precision. But aphasia was a condition Leonard could exploit because it was easy to misunderstand. When Arthur struggled to answer a question in the hospital, Leonard would gently explain that his uncle had become confused. When Arthur tried to push away papers, Leonard would say he was agitated. When Arthur stared at a visitor with anger because he could not express what he wanted, Leonard would tell the visitor that the stroke had changed him. The people around Arthur were not cruel. Most were simply busy, worried, and unfamiliar with the difference between a person who cannot communicate in the usual way and a person who cannot think. Leonard made that confusion useful. Within days, he arranged for himself to control Arthur's schedule. Visitors had to be approved through Leonard's office. Phone calls were screened. Longtime employees who came to see Arthur were told that he needed quiet. Board members received carefully edited medical summaries. Even Arthur's home staff were warned that too much stimulation could endanger his recovery. Every restriction sounded reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a wall. Naomi Reed saw the wall before anyone else did. She had not been a senior executive at Ren Meridian. She had never attended shareholder dinners or appeared in annual reports. For most of her career, Naomi had worked in the Records and Preservation Department, a small office in the oldest building on the company campus. Her work involved minutes from board meetings, trust amendments, land deeds, historical contracts, environmental reports, employee pension records, and the delicate task of deciding what should be protected when everyone else wanted more space. It was work that made powerful people impatient. They wanted files quickly. They wanted old disputes forgotten. They wanted signatures without context and summaries without inconvenient attachments. Naomi had learned that the most important document in a room was often the one someone called outdated. She had come to Ren Meridian in her 20s after her father injured his back at the factory and could no longer work steady shifts. Her father had been proud of the company even when it failed him. He kept a photograph of Arthur shaking hands with a line of welders after a contract victory. And he told Naomi that men like Arthur were rare because they still remembered the names of people who worked below them. Naomi did not romanticize the company. She knew its history included mistakes, layoffs, and decisions that hurt people. But she also knew Arthur and his late wife, Beatrice, had spent decades trying to build safeguards against the kind of greed that could erase a company's conscience in a single board meeting. Beatrice had been the first person at Ren Meridian to treat Naomi's work as something more than storage. She had a scholar's mind and a practical understanding of human weakness. She believed that people often behaved honorably when circumstances were easy, but true character appeared when money, illness, inheritance, and fear entered the same room. Years before Arthur's stroke, Beatrice had begun building a separate system for critical records. She called it the Lantern Archive because, in her words, hidden things should have a light kept for them. The archive was not a secret fortune or a private collection of gossip. It contained certified copies of documents that could matter if family pressure, corporate pressure, or medical crisis ever placed Arthur's intentions at risk. Arthur agreed because he understood what Beatrice was protecting. He had seen families tear themselves apart over a will. He had seen elderly founders surrounded by advisors who suddenly became experts on what was best for them. He had seen how quickly a person's own wishes could disappear once people decided that age, illness, or slow speech made those wishes inconvenient. The Lantern Archive was lodged not in Ren Meridian's offices, but in the county's restricted records repository. The company kept reference copies, but the certified originals were stored under a protocol requiring a court order, an independent records officer, and a documented chain of custody. Naomi had helped organize the material, but she could not open it alone. No one could. That was the point. Leonard knew the archive existed. Naomi was certain of it. He had attended the meeting years earlier, when the capacity safeguards were discussed, although he had acted bored at the time. He had called them overly cautious and expensive. Beatrice had smiled politely, then asked that his objection be entered into the minutes. After Arthur's stroke, the first sign that Leonard was moving against Naomi came quietly. 2 folders vanished from the company records room. They were not dramatic files. One contained old board resolutions related to Arthur's voting shares. The other held correspondence about the Lantern Archive. Naomi noticed because she knew every box number and accession date. When she asked the new compliance manager about the missing folders, she was told that Leonard had ordered a document review. 3 days later, Naomi was informed that her position had been eliminated in a restructuring. The letter was efficient and cold. It praised her long service, offered a severance package, and required her to return all company property. It also contained a warning that unauthorized retention or disclosure of internal materials could lead to legal action. Naomi understood the message beneath the formal language. Leonard was not simply removing her from payroll. He was making sure that if she spoke up, people would assume she had stolen something. She went home that afternoon carrying an empty cardboard box. In the box were a framed photograph of her father, a small brass paperweight shaped like a lantern, and a note Beatrice had written years earlier after Naomi stayed late to recover a damaged pension ledger. The note thanked her for believing that records were a form of respect. For 2 weeks, Naomi did nothing, not because she did not care, but because she knew that rushing toward a man like Leonard would only give him the story he wanted. He needed her to appear emotional, resentful, and unstable. He needed the court to see a dismissed employee rather than a witness to something larger. Then Arthur's old driver called her from a number she did not recognize. The driver had worked for Arthur for 27 years. He sounded frightened. Leonard had reassigned him, but he had seen Arthur during a transfer between appointments. Arthur had struggled to hold a notepad. On it, he had drawn a rectangle, a red circle, and a small lantern. The driver did not understand, but he remembered Naomi had once spoken about old company records. He thought she might. Naomi understood immediately. The rectangle was a document box. The red circle was a seal. The lantern was the archive. She contacted Daniel Park, the attorney the probate court had appointed to represent Arthur's interests in the guardianship case. Daniel was not Leonard's lawyer and not Naomi's ally. He was a careful attorney with a reputation for taking difficult cases seriously. But when Naomi first called, he sounded tired. He had already reviewed the medical report from Dr. Martin Vale, a respected neurologist, who concluded that Arthur could not make complex decisions. He had also listened to Leonard's account of a confused old man being manipulated by a former employee. Daniel agreed to meet Naomi only because Arthur's driver had independently confirmed the strange drawing. Naomi did not try to impress him. She did not pretend to have answers she did not possess. She placed copies of her employment records, the severance letter, the archive protocol, and a timeline of missing files on the table between them. She explained what aphasia was. She explained why a hurried verbal examination could not determine whether Arthur understood financial decisions. And she explained that the Lantern Archive might contain documents relevant to any attempt to take control of Arthur's property. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked the question Leonard had wanted everyone to ask. Why should anyone believe a fired records employee over a nephew, a doctor, and a board of directors? Naomi answered that they should not believe her because she was fired. They should verify the record because the record either existed or it did not. That answer changed something. Daniel checked the county repository. The Lantern Archive was real. Its access conditions were real. And most importantly, a limited request for emergency guardianship had been filed by Leonard only 48 hours after the first scheduled board discussion of the Horizon Vale sale. The timing did not prove wrongdoing, but it made the request impossible to ignore. The guardianship petition was written to sound compassionate. It described Arthur as vulnerable, confused, and unable to understand the consequences of business decisions. It argued that without a responsible family member in charge, Arthur's health and assets could be endangered. Leonard offered himself as the obvious solution. He claimed he had no conflict of interest because he sought no personal gain and only wished to preserve the company his uncle loved. What the petition did not mention was the vote. Arthur's shares represented enough voting power to block the sale of the housing division. If a guardian controlled those shares, the board could approve the deal. If the deal went through, Horizon Vale would pay advisory fees to several outside firms. One of those firms, according to a thin thread Daniel found in public business filings, was connected to a company called Northwatch Strategies. Northwatch Strategies had been formed 6 months earlier by Leonard's former college roommate. It had no public website, no employees listed beyond a mailing address, and no history of major consulting work. Yet it had suddenly been named as a strategic transition advisor in preliminary documents related to the potential sale. Daniel did not accuse Leonard immediately. He knew better. A suspicious company was not proof. A coincidence was not proof. But the pattern was beginning to form. The day before the probate hearing, Daniel petitioned Judge Imani Cole for authority to inspect the Lantern Archive under the court's supervision. Leonard objected through his counsel, arguing that old documents would only distract from Arthur's present medical condition. He also claimed that Naomi had manufactured the entire issue because she resented losing her job. Judge Cole did not approve a full release. She allowed a narrow preliminary inspection by the county records officer, Daniel, and counsel for both sides. Naomi could attend only as a factual witness because she had helped organize the archive. The limitation frustrated her, but it also protected the process. The evidence had to survive more than outrage. It had to survive scrutiny. At the county repository, the red-sealed box was brought from a climate-controlled shelf behind 2 locked doors. The records officer read the accession number aloud. Daniel verified it against the court order. Leonard's attorney watched every movement. Naomi stood with her hands folded, afraid to breathe too loudly. Inside the box were several folders, each stamped with dates and certification marks. The first contained Arthur's Capacity Safeguard Directive, executed 7 years earlier. It did not declare that Arthur would always be competent. It did something more careful. It required that if he ever suffered a condition affecting speech or conventional communication, any assessment of his decision-making ability had to include a qualified specialist familiar with supported communication methods. It also required that no family member with a financial interest in a pending corporate transaction could be appointed to control his voting shares without an independent review. Leonard's attorney dismissed the directive as old planning material. Daniel did not. The document was signed, witnessed, and properly certified. More damaging still, Leonard's name appeared on the final page. He had signed as an acknowledging witness. The second folder contained a limited trust amendment. Arthur had placed a portion of his controlling shares into a protective arrangement designed to prevent a guardian from using temporary medical vulnerability to force a corporate transaction. If Arthur could not communicate, the shares were not to be handed automatically to a relative. They were to be placed under a neutral fiduciary until Arthur's capacity had been properly assessed through the protocol he had chosen. The third folder was more troubling. It included minutes from a private meeting held after Leonard had once asked Arthur to sign broad proxy forms during a period of illness 3 years earlier. Arthur had refused. Beatrice had insisted that the conversation be documented. The minutes did not call Leonard a criminal. They did not predict the future. They simply recorded that Arthur was concerned about pressure from people who might benefit from his inability to participate fully in company decisions. That concern had been sealed with the rest of the archive, because Beatrice believed it could become a family weapon if it were made public too soon. At the end of the inspection, the records officer discovered a fourth folder that had been marked for release only if a petition for guardianship was filed by a person named in the earlier documents. The folder was still sealed in red wax. That was the box Naomi carried into court. Leonard had not expected it to appear. He had expected the archive to remain locked behind procedure long enough for him to gain emergency control. He had expected Arthur's silence to do the work for him. And when he saw the red seal in Naomi's arms, he understood that the courtroom was no longer a place where he could control every question. Judge Cole did not open the sealed folder that first morning. She ordered a short evidentiary hearing, required the parties to submit the materials for verification, and appointed an independent communication specialist to evaluate Arthur. It was not the victory Naomi wanted, but it was the first time in 6 weeks that Arthur's condition would be examined without Leonard deciding what his silence meant. As court recessed, Leonard walked past Naomi without looking at her. His face had returned to its public expression of patience and grief. But his hands were clenched hard enough that the skin around his knuckles had turned pale. Naomi watched him leave and felt no satisfaction yet. The red seal had not proved anything. It had only bought time. And time was exactly what Leonard had been trying to steal. The 48 hours that followed were the longest Arthur had spent without Leonard controlling the story told about him. For the first time since the stroke, people entered his room without first asking Leonard whether the visit was necessary. The independent specialist appointed by Judge Cole was Dr. Alina Mercer, a neuropsychologist whose work focused on assessing decision-making ability in people with aphasia, traumatic brain injury, and other communication disabilities. She did not arrive with a stack of rapid-fire verbal questions and a stopwatch. She arrived with a tablet, written options, visual scales, financial summaries formatted in plain language, and the patience to let silence mean thought rather than failure. Dr. Mercer spent nearly 4 hours with Arthur over 2 sessions. She asked him to identify people he trusted, explain the purpose of his major holdings, recognize the difference between selling an asset and granting someone control over it, and indicate whether he understood the consequences of a guardian voting his shares. She used yes or no confirmation methods, written keywords, picture-supported questions, and repeated checks to make sure a gesture was not being misunderstood. Arthur was slow. Sometimes he became exhausted and had to stop. Sometimes a word appeared on his screen only after several attempts, but the substance of his answers was consistent. He knew the value of his principal assets. He knew the proposed Horizon Vale transaction. He recognized Leonard's role in it. He understood that a guardian could make choices he did not want. And when asked whether he wanted Leonard to control his health decisions or voting shares, Arthur rejected that choice with a clarity that no one in the room could honestly misread. That conclusion did not end the case. Leonard's lawyers argued that capacity could fluctuate and that the complexity of a corporate sale required more than basic understanding. They suggested that Arthur's refusal of Leonard was emotional, influenced by Naomi, and not a reason to leave important decisions unprotected. Their strategy was subtle. They no longer needed to prove Arthur was completely unaware. They only needed to persuade the judge that fear and complexity justified taking control away from him. Daniel began with the independent report. He walked the court through the difference between speech impairment and impaired reasoning. He emphasized that Arthur did not need to prove that he could speak like he had before the stroke. He needed only to show that he could understand and communicate decisions through methods appropriate to his condition. The law was not supposed to reward people for refusing to provide the support that would allow a disabled person to be heard. Leonard's attorney attacked the report carefully. He pointed to Arthur's fatigue. He questioned whether visual aids had made the answers too simple. He noted that Dr. Mercer had met Arthur after Naomi raised concerns, implying that the entire evaluation had been shaped by a former employee's agenda. He tried to turn every accommodation into proof of manipulation. Dr. Mercer did not become defensive. She explained that accommodations did not put thoughts into Arthur's mind. They removed barriers that prevented other people from hearing thoughts already there. She explained that a person using glasses was not being coached to see, and that a person using an interpreter was not being coached to speak. The same principle applied to supported communication. At first, Dr. Vale appeared confident. He had years of clinical experience and a respected private practice. His original assessment was concise, formal, and built around familiar categories. Arthur had failed to answer certain verbal questions quickly. He had struggled to repeat phrases. He had become frustrated during testing. Dr. Vale had concluded that these failures indicated substantial cognitive decline. Daniel did not accuse him of lying. Instead, he asked what methods he had used to distinguish aphasia from loss of executive function. Dr. Vale acknowledged that he had not used a communication board, written choice assessment, extended response time, or consultation with a speech-language specialist. He said the setting had been urgent and that he relied on professional judgment. Daniel then asked whether Leonard's office had arranged the assessment and whether Leonard had remained nearby during portions of the examination. Dr. Vale said yes. He explained that Leonard had been concerned about Arthur's agitation and wanted the process completed quickly. The next question changed the air in the room. Daniel asked whether Dr. Vale had disclosed a consulting agreement between his clinic and Northwatch Strategies. The agreement had been found in documents produced after the court ordered a limited financial disclosure. It was not a direct payment for the guardianship opinion. That would have been too obvious. Instead, Northwatch had retained Dr. Vale's clinic months earlier to provide executive wellness consulting for a future transition project. The work had not yet begun in any meaningful way, but the contract promised a substantial fee if the Horizon Vale transaction closed. The capacity directive from the Lantern Archive showed that Leonard had known about the safeguards. The trust amendment showed he could not automatically control Arthur's shares if he stood to gain from a pending transaction. But Leonard continued to deny that he had any personal interest in the Horizon Vale sale. He claimed Northwatch was an outside consultant chosen by the buyer. He claimed he had no ownership in it, no promised payment, and no reason to want the vote outcome beyond the good of the company. Then Daniel introduced the records obtained through the court-supervised review of Ren Meridian's transaction files. They were not sensational documents. There was no single email in which Leonard confessed to stealing from Arthur. There was no recording of him laughing about his uncle's stroke. The truth arrived in the way real financial deception often arrived, through dates, signatures, spreadsheets, and words that had been chosen too carefully. The first document was an early draft of the Horizon Vale term sheet. In its original form, Northwatch was listed as an independent transition advisor. In a later version, a small notation appeared in the payment schedule. It referred to an incentive allocation for a beneficial participant, identified only by initials. Daniel displayed a separate compliance questionnaire signed by Leonard during negotiations. On that form, Leonard had answered that he had no direct or indirect financial interest in any outside party connected to the transaction. The initials in the incentive schedule matched Leonard's full legal name. Leonard's attorney objected immediately. He argued that initials were ambiguous. Daniel agreed that, standing alone, they could mean many things. He then introduced a second document, a private side letter between Northwatch and a holding company called Hale Family Ventures. The holding company was not listed on Ren Meridian's public disclosures, but corporate registration records showed that it was controlled by a trust established for Leonard's children. The side letter promised that if the sale closed, Hale Family Ventures would receive a percentage of Northwatch's success fee. The payment would not go directly into Leonard's personal account. It would flow through a family trust designed to make the connection difficult to see at a glance. That was not merely a conflict of interest. It was the exact type of indirect financial benefit Arthur's trust amendment had been created to prevent. Leonard's expression did not collapse. He was too disciplined for that. But the rhythm of his composure changed. He began consulting with his lawyer more often. He stopped looking at Arthur. And for the first time, the people who had believed his story could see the outline of the trap he had built. Daniel continued. The next record showed that the guardianship petition had been prepared using information from a draft proxy package. The proxy package was dated 4 days before Leonard filed in court. It assumed that someone other than Arthur would control his voting shares at the upcoming board meeting. It did not name Leonard directly, but the instructions matched the authority he sought in the guardianship petition. Leonard had not simply responded to a medical crisis. He had begun arranging the corporate consequences of Arthur's incapacity before a judge had ever examined whether Arthur was incapable. Judge Cole asked whether there was evidence Leonard had discussed the proxy plan before Arthur's stroke. Daniel said there was not. He did not exaggerate. The court could not punish a man for plans that had not been proven. But the sequence after the stroke was enough to show urgency of a different kind. Leonard had treated Arthur's illness as an opportunity before he treated it as a human tragedy. At that point, the county records officer was called forward with the final red-sealed folder from the Lantern Archive. The procedure was slow by design. The officer identified the accession number, confirmed the court order, and described the condition of the seal. Daniel and Leonard's counsel examined it. Judge Cole asked whether either party disputed that the seal had remained intact since it was placed in county custody. Neither did. When the officer broke the wax, the sound was quiet. It was not the sound of a dramatic weapon being drawn. It was the sound of a barrier giving way after years of pressure. Yet every person in the courtroom heard it, because Leonard had spent the entire case trying to make sure that folder remained closed. Inside was a memorandum prepared jointly by Arthur and Beatrice 7 years earlier, along with a notarized statement from the attorney who had advised them at the time. The memorandum described an incident involving blank proxy forms and a proposed transfer of authority. Leonard had approached Arthur during a period of illness following surgery and urged him to sign documents that would allow Leonard to act quickly in corporate matters. Arthur had refused after reading the papers. Beatrice had been disturbed enough to insist on a written record. The memorandum did not claim Leonard had committed a crime then. It stated that Arthur believed Leonard had minimized the scope of the proxy forms and had become angry when asked to wait for independent counsel. Because the family chose not to make the matter public, the documents had been stored in the Lantern Archive as part of Arthur's future capacity planning. Attached to the memorandum was a statement of intent signed by Arthur. It said that if any future health condition limited his speech or mobility, he wanted the people around him to distinguish between inability to perform quickly and inability to decide. It stated that he did not want Leonard appointed as guardian, proxy, conservator, or controller of his voting shares without an independent review, particularly if Leonard could benefit from a company transaction. Leonard had signed an acknowledgement that he had received notice of this statement. That signature was the moment his defense became almost impossible to sustain. For weeks, he had told the court he believed he was the natural person to take charge because Arthur had never expressed any other preference. He had sworn that he knew of no binding instructions limiting his role. Now the court had certified documents showing that he knew exactly what Arthur wanted and had been warned years earlier that he was not to use illness as a path to control. The damage went beyond the guardianship case. It reached his credibility in every statement he had made under oath. Judge Cole did not rush to pronounce judgment. She reviewed the materials, asked questions about dates, and gave Leonard's attorney time to respond. The lawyer argued that the old memorandum reflected a family disagreement, not a legal finding. He argued that Leonard's signature on an acknowledgement did not mean he remembered every provision years later. He argued that his client's concern for Arthur could still be genuine, despite an undisclosed financial interest. Some of those arguments were not absurd. That was what made the case important. Justice did not require pretending that every difficult family conflict had a simple villain. It required looking at the entire pattern. The pattern was what condemned Leonard. Arthur's speech had been impaired, but he had been denied meaningful accommodations. Leonard had sought emergency control at the exact moment Arthur's shares mattered most. Leonard had withheld capacity safeguards that named him as a conflicted party. His doctor had failed to disclose a financial relationship connected to the transaction. A hidden family trust stood to profit from the sale. And the sealed record established that Leonard had been warned years earlier that Arthur feared exactly this kind of pressure. Taken together, it was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. Before Judge Cole issued her decision, she asked Arthur whether he wished to make his own preference known. Arthur's communication tablet rested on the table in front of him. Dr. Mercer sat nearby but did not touch it. Arthur looked at the screen for a long time. His left hand moved slowly, selecting letters one by one. He paused. He deleted a letter. He began again. No one hurried him. No one interpreted the silence for him. For the first time since his stroke, the entire room waited for Arthur at Arthur's pace. When he finished, Dr. Mercer verified the message with him using a second method. Arthur confirmed that he did not want Leonard to make decisions for him. He confirmed that he wanted independent assistance while recovering. And he confirmed that he wanted the housing division protected until he could participate fully in any decision affecting it. The meaning was simple. Arthur had never asked to be rescued from his own life. He had asked to be heard. Judge Cole denied Leonard's petition for emergency guardianship. She found that Arthur had demonstrated decision-making capacity with appropriate supports, and that Leonard's undisclosed financial interests created a serious conflict. She ordered that no one could exercise authority over Arthur's personal voting shares without further court approval. She directed the parties to implement a supported decision-making plan, including access to independent medical, legal, and communication professionals. She also ordered the record transmitted to the appropriate authorities for review of possible false statements in the guardianship petition, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and financial misconduct connected to the proposed transaction. The order did not declare Leonard guilty of crimes. It did something more immediate and more devastating. It removed his ability to hide behind the appearance of concern. The court had not sent him away in handcuffs. There was no satisfying instant punishment, no sudden collapse under flashing cameras. Leonard left the courtroom surrounded by lawyers, his face pale and controlled. But the world he had built depended on people believing that he was trustworthy. That belief had been broken in public by the very process he had tried to use as a weapon. The consequences unfolded over the following months. Ren Meridian's board placed Leonard on administrative leave while an independent investigation began. Several directors who had accepted his version of events admitted that they had not asked enough questions about Arthur's condition or the Horizon Vale proposal. The sale was halted. The company's compliance office discovered that Northwatch had been included in internal planning long before it had been properly disclosed. Investigators traced the expected success fee